The morning anchor on the local Nashville public radio station read the headline with a practiced, solemn detachment. A former financial advisor from a neighboring suburb had just been sentenced to federal prison for wire fraud. The broadcaster detailed how the man had quietly drained his own grandmother's estate, forging power of attorney documents to fund a lavish lifestyle while she suffered from cognitive decline. The segment concluded by citing a recent Department of Justice report from the National Elder Justice Task Force, stating that billions of dollars are stolen from seniors every single year. The anchor noted the most chilling statistic of all. The perpetrators are rarely anonymous scammers calling from overseas. They are most often family members, sitting right across the Thanksgiving table. I reached out and turned the volume dial on my car dashboard until the radio clicked into silence. Listening to that news report did not shock me. It simply pulled me back to a Tuesday evening last autumn. I track illicit funds for a living. My name is Avery Foster, and I am a senior anti-money laundering investigator for a commercial bank based in Nashville, Tennessee. I spend my days tracing offshore ledgers, dissecting wire fraud, and watching desperate people construct elaborate financial cages for themselves. I know exactly how thieves operate when they believe the room is empty. I sat at the mahogany dining table inside my parents' house. It was my 32nd birthday. The room smelled of roasted lamb and expensive bourbon. My mother, Brenda, stood near the kitchen island, orchestrating a flawless suburban performance for her neighbors. My grandfather, Harrison, sat to my right. His hands carried the slight tremor of age, but his eyes retained a sharp, focused clarity. While my mother was busy lighting candles on a bakery cake, my grandfather reached under the table. He pressed a folded slip of heavy stock paper into my palm. The paper felt thick, carrying the unmistakable texture of a certified bank draft. The amount printed on that line was exactly $60,000. His fingers gripped mine with surprising strength. He offered a single warning nod. I slid the paper deep into the pocket of my wool trousers. My older brother Mason sat across the table. He wore a designer linen shirt funded by Phantom Investments and a string of failed startups. His eyes narrowed. He caught the subtle exchange. 10 minutes later, I walked down the narrow hallway toward the guest bathroom. Heavy footsteps sounded behind me. Mason grabbed my shoulder and shoved me into his old childhood bedroom. He slammed the door and twisted the brass lock. The metallic click echoed in the small space. "Hand it over, Avery," he demanded. His breath carried the sour scent of stale wine and unearned entitlement. He extended his open palm. I kept my hands resting loosely at my sides. I declined the request. His jaw tightened. The veins in his neck strained against his collar. He stepped forward and struck the side of my face with his open hand. The sting radiated across my cheekbone, burning hot against my skin. He did not back away. He pulled his cellular phone from his pocket and held it inches from my face. "Give me the check, or I am calling 911 right now," he hissed. "I will tell the dispatcher I caught you extorting a vulnerable elder. I will tell them you manipulated his dementia to steal his money. I will ruin your pristine corporate license tonight." I did not scream. I did not raise a hand to soothe my stinging cheek. Panic is a useless biological response when dealing with an amateur predator. I mapped the exact distance to the door. I noted the erratic, frantic rhythm of his breathing. I sidestepped his posture, unlocked the brass deadbolt, and walked out of the house into the crisp Tennessee night. I kept the folded paper securely in my pocket. Welcome to Vega Vengeance, where blood is thick, but bank ledgers are thicker. If you have ever had to protect yourself from the siblings who were supposed to protect you, then you understand this story. How old were you when you realized your family was never going to change? Drop your age in the comments and hit subscribe. Let me tell you what I found the next morning when I walked into my commercial bank and handed that $60,000 slip of paper to the branch manager. The morning sun crested over the Nashville skyline, casting long geometric shadows across the damp pavement. I drove my sensible sedan toward the downtown financial district. The ambient temperature inside the cabin was warm, but the right side of my face retained a faint, lingering ache. It was a physical receipt of my brother's panic. I did not apply an ice pack the night before. I let the sting serve as a focal point. Resting on the passenger seat was the folded slip of heavy stock paper. $60,000. A standard consumer holding a bank draft of that magnitude would rush to open their smartphone banking application. They would endorse the back, snap a photograph, and wait for the digital deposit to clear. A senior investigator understands that depositing unverified funds is a severe tactical error. Any transaction exceeding $10,000 triggers a mandatory currency transaction report. It alerts the Federal Treasury. If the originating account is compromised, the receiving account is immediately frozen under suspicion of complicity. I needed to verify the architectural integrity of the ledger before I attached my own name to the transaction. I parked in the subterranean garage beneath my corporate branch. The air smelled of roasted espresso beans and fresh floor wax. I walked through the glass double doors and bypassed the teller line. I navigated the carpeted corridor toward the executive administrative suites. I needed an environment insulated from the public floor. I stepped into the office of the branch manager. His name was Neil. He possessed a neat silver haircut and the calm, measured demeanor of a man who managed high net worth portfolios. We interacted frequently during internal compliance audits. He offered a polite, professional smile and gestured toward the leather guest chair positioned opposite his mahogany desk. I did not exchange morning pleasantries. I withdrew the heavy paper from my pocket and placed it flat on the polished wood. I pushed it across the desk. "I need a routing verification on this draft, Neil," I said, keeping my vocal register low and even. "I need to confirm the originating entity before I initiate any formal clearing protocols." Neil picked up the check. He adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses and examined the handwritten payee line. He noted the sum. He nodded, executing the routine procedure. He turned his attention to his dual monitors. His fingers moved across his mechanical keyboard, initiating a query through our secure internal screening matrix. I sat in the leather chair and observed his physiology. The initial keystrokes were rapid and confident. Then the rhythm faltered. The typing slowed to a single, hesitant keystroke. Then it ceased entirely. Neil leaned closer to his primary monitor. The blue light from the screen reflected off his lenses. The healthy flush of his skin drained away, retreating from his cheeks and leaving a sickly, pale pallor behind. He swallowed hard. The prominent tendon in his neck shifted. He did not look at me. He looked at the closed door of his office, ensuring we were isolated. "Avery," he murmured, his voice dropping into a tight, strained whisper. "Where did you acquire this instrument?" I maintained my composed posture. "It was given to me last night by my grandfather," I replied. "He is 82 years old." Neil picked up the check again, holding it by the very edges as if the paper were saturated in a lethal toxin. "This draft is not drawn from a personal retirement account," he stated. "It does not originate from a pension or a standard consumer trust. It belongs to a commercial entity registered as Crestview Holdings." I processed the nomenclature. Crestview Holdings was not a name associated with my grandfather's lifelong career in hardware sales. It was a fabricated corporate shield. "The system has a hard lock on this routing sequence," Neil continued, his eyes darting back to the glowing screen. "The Financial Crimes Enforcement Network flagged this specific ledger 3 weeks ago. It is the target of an active federal investigation. The primary charges are synthetic identity fraud and elder exploitation." The architecture of the betrayal materialized in my mind with staggering, pristine clarity. My brother Mason did not simply possess a bad temper and a string of failed startup ventures. He was operating a sophisticated, illicit laundering network. Synthetic identity fraud occurs when a predator strips the Social Security number of an individual boasting a flawless, decades-long credit history. They fuse that pristine numeric identifier with a fabricated corporate name to open massive lines of credit and secure shadow bank accounts. My grandfather was suffering from cognitive decline. His memory was failing, but his financial footprint was immaculate. Mason hijacked Harrison's identity. He used the elderly man's immaculate credit to construct Crestview Holdings. He utilized the shell corporation to wash dirty capital and fund his designer linen shirts and his new luxury truck. He assumed the old man would never notice the missing mail or the phantom digital ledgers. But dementia is not a steady, uninterrupted descent. It features brief, unpredictable windows of profound lucidity. Harrison must have experienced a moment of clarity yesterday afternoon. He must have wandered into Mason's room and discovered the hidden commercial checkbook. He saw the staggering balances. He realized his grandson was systematically destroying his legacy. He knew he lacked the cognitive stamina to explain the complex fraud to the authorities. He needed a translator. He needed the one person in the family who deciphered illicit ledgers for a living. He wrote the check for $60,000 and slipped it into my hand during my birthday dinner. It was not a generous gift. It was a silent, desperate plea for a rescue. And Mason's reaction in the hallway made perfect, terrifying sense. When my brother shoved me into the bedroom and struck my face, he was not acting out of petty sibling rivalry. He was a cornered felon, realizing his primary physical evidence was walking out the front door. He threatened to call the police and frame me for elder abuse because he needed to regain control of his illicit instrument before I scrutinized the routing digits. Avery, we are required by federal statute to confiscate this document, Neil informed me, breaking my internal calculus. I have to surrender this to the Compliance Division immediately. It is evidence. I did not protest. I knew the regulatory protocols better than anyone in the building. I nodded my agreement. I need you to initiate a silent freeze on the originating account, I instructed him. Neil hesitated, his hands hovering over the keyboard. A silent freeze is a specific administrative maneuver. If we deploy a standard security lock, the banking software automatically generates a text message alert to the account administrator. Mason would receive a notification on his cellular phone indicating the draft was flagged. He would realize his perimeter was breached. He would immediately transfer the remaining capital into an offshore, decentralized cryptocurrency wallet and destroy his hard drives. We cannot alert the administrator, Neil, I said, my tone hardening into an unyielding directive. If you trigger an automated warning, the suspect will burn the remaining assets before noon. A silent freeze locks the capital, but mimics a standard processing delay on the user interface. It will display a pending status. It provides us the necessary operational window. Neil exhaled a slow, shaky breath. He understood the tactical necessity. He executed the override commands. The silent freeze engaged. I requested a certified digital copy of the front and back of the draft for my own forensic records. He processed the scan and routed the encrypted file directly to my secure terminal. I stood up from the leather chair. I smoothed the front of my tailored trousers. The domestic assault from the night before was now a trivial footnote. The conflict had escalated into a sprawling federal financial crime. My brother was a predator, actively strip mining our grandfather's history. But a laundering network requires maintenance. It requires enablers. Mason lived a highly visible lifestyle, boasting about his crypto brokerage to anyone who would listen. He parked his expensive vehicles in our parents' driveway. Brenda and Gary coddled him, praised his entrepreneurial spirit, and treated his unearned wealth as proof of their own superior parenting. I needed to know the depth of the rot. I needed to determine if my parents were merely oblivious bystanders blinded by their affection for the golden child, or if they were active, willing co-conspirators in the exploitation of their own patriarch. I walked out of the branch manager's office and navigated the corridor toward the exit. The upcoming weekend provided the perfect venue for an observation. Every Sunday, Brenda and Gary hosted a lavish barbecue in their sprawling backyard. It was a rigid, weekly ritual designed to project the image of a flawless Southern family to their affluent neighbors. I needed to attend that gathering. I needed to stand on their manicured lawn, watch them perform their curated lives, and trace the invisible threads connecting their performative wealth to my grandfather's stolen identity. The forensic investigation was officially underway. Sunday afternoons in the affluent enclaves of Nashville carry a distinct oppressive humidity. It is not merely a product of the southern climate. It is the suffocating weight of social expectation. My parents, Brenda and Gary, treated their weekly neighborhood barbecue as a rigid theatrical production. They utilized these gatherings to project the image of a flawless, prosperous family to their affluent peers. Every smile was curated. Every anecdote was rehearsed. I turned my sedan onto their pristine, tree-lined cul-de-sac. The driveway resembled a premium automotive showroom. Parked at the very front, angled perfectly to catch the afternoon sunlight, sat a brand-new, custom-ordered pickup truck. The vehicle featured heavy off-road tires, an immaculate black paint job, and dark-tinted windows. As a financial investigator, I possess a reflexive habit of calculating asset values. I ran the current market appraisal in my head. The truck retailed for $90,000 minimum. I parked my practical vehicle near the curb and walked up the manicured stone pathway. The air smelled of hickory charcoal and expensive synthetic floral perfumes. I opened the heavy oak front door and navigated the hardwood foyer toward the kitchen. Brenda stood at the sprawling quartz island. My mother wore a flowing linen sundress and delicate silver jewelry. Her posture was tense, tight with the logistical anxiety of hosting 40 guests. She held a crushed aluminum foil pan bearing the printed logo of a discount warehouse club. The pan contained a pre-baked commercial peach cobbler. I stopped in the hallway and watched her work. She used a metal spatula to slide the dense, sugary mass out of the cheap foil and into an elegant, hand-painted ceramic baking dish. She meticulously smoothed the crust, hiding the rigid rectangular corners of the generic pastry. She sprinkled a dash of raw sugar over the top to provide a rustic aesthetic. That ceramic dish was a recurring guest at every family function. It represented the exact brand of maternal care my mother preferred. She purchased something cheap and effortless, repackaged it in a vessel of undeniable value, and accepted the glowing compliments of her neighbors without ever admitting the deception. She wanted the applause without the expenditure of genuine energy. She turned around and noticed me standing near the threshold. Her eyes widened for a fraction of a second before her practiced hostess smile stretched across her face. "Avery," she chimed her voice, adopting a bright, artificial lilt, "you made it. I have been baking all morning." I did not challenge the fabrication. I offered a flat, polite nod. "It smells wonderful, Mom," I replied, keeping my tone perfectly level. I stepped past the quartz island and walked through the sliding glass doors onto the expansive rear patio. Gary stood near the built-in stone grill, holding stainless steel tongs like a regal scepter. He was laughing loudly with a local real estate broker, projecting the hearty, buoyant persona of a successful patriarch. But the true center of gravity was my older brother. Mason leaned against the stone fire pit holding a craft beer. He wore a fitted designer polo shirt and expensive polarized sunglasses. He projected the aura of a thriving, self-made titan. He showed zero physiological signs of remorse regarding our Tuesday night physical altercation. His breathing was steady. His posture was relaxed. He believed his secret was safely locked away. He thought the strike across my face had intimidated me into permanent silence. He was holding court with 3 neighbors from across the street. "The crypto brokerage is scaling faster than my initial quarterly projections," Mason boasted, his tone dripping with unearned superiority. I had to upgrade the vehicle just to secure the appropriate tax write-off for the business. The neighbors nodded, sipping their iced drinks, thoroughly captivated by the illusion. I stood near the wooden railing and listened to the pitch. In the realm of financial crime, investigators track 3 distinct phases of money laundering: placement, layering, and integration. Mason was currently executing the integration phase in plain sight. He was taking the stolen funds from the flagged Shell account and converting them into tangible luxury assets, like the $90,000 truck parked in the driveway. He was washing my grandfather's legacy through a fake digital currency firm. I scanned the perimeter of the manicured lawn and located Harrison. My grandfather sat in a shaded wicker chair near the far edge of the patio. A thin woven blanket rested over his lap, despite the stifling summer heat. His gaze was vacant today. The brief window of sharp lucidity that prompted him to slip me the cashier check had firmly closed. He stared at the grass, entirely oblivious to the fact that the young man bragging near the fire pit was actively strip mining his history. I observed Mason walk over and pat the old man on the shoulder, playing the role of the devoted grandson for the viewing audience. The parasitic dynamic was sickening. I stood near the railing and performed the empirical arithmetic. Gary managed a mid-tier logistics department. Brenda generated zero income. Yet they employed professional landscapers, hosted catered weekly events, and funded a pristine lifestyle. Mason possessed no verifiable employment history, yet he drove an imported vehicle and wore designer clothing. The math was fundamentally broken. The illicit Crestview Holdings ledger was not merely funding Mason's personal greed. It was subsidizing this entire suburban theater. My parents were either willfully ignorant of the origin of this sudden wealth, or they were active, willing participants in the exploitation of their own patriarch. They were trading Harrison's financial security for neighborhood prestige. Brenda emerged from the kitchen carrying the heavy ceramic dish. The guests gathered around the outdoor dining table, murmuring their approval. My mother distributed generous portions of the warm peach cobbler onto porcelain plates. She walked over and handed one to me. The pastry radiated a cloying, artificial sweetness. I looked down at the food. Consuming this dessert meant participating in the lie. It meant swallowing the spoils of elder abuse. I held the plate for a brief moment, letting the ceramic heat my palms. Then I set it down on a nearby wrought iron side table. "I apologize," I announced, keeping my voice devoid of emotional inflection. "I have a complex corporate compliance audit scheduled for tomorrow morning. I need to return to my apartment and review the ledgers." Brenda frowned, her synthetic smile faltering. "You are leaving before dessert?" she asked, her tone laced with practiced disappointment. "The schedule is unforgiving," I replied. I did not wait for a dismissal or offer a warm goodbye. I walked back through the house, out the front door, and returned to my sensible sedan. I drove away from the pristine cul-de-sac. I did not head directly home. 2 miles down the main boulevard, I pulled into a municipal park. I stepped out of my car, carrying a small plastic container I had snagged from the kitchen counter, containing the slice of cobbler Brenda insisted I take for the road. I walked over to a heavy green trash bin. I opened the lid and dropped the container inside. It landed with a dull thud against discarded soda cups and crumpled wrappers. I sat back in the driver's seat and gripped the leather steering wheel. The financial anomaly was clear, but the structural mechanism remained hidden. Mason could not hijack Harrison's identity, open commercial shell accounts, and funnel hundreds of thousands of dollars without a rigorous paper trail. He needed legal authority to bypass the banking safeguards. He needed a document granting him supreme control over the estate. Tomorrow morning, I would leverage my professional software to access the state corporate filings and county property records. I needed to locate the specific legal instrument he forged to execute this sprawling treason. The silent investigative grind was about to commence. The drive from the municipal park back to my apartment provided a necessary transition period. I navigated the Sunday evening traffic of downtown Nashville, leaving the sprawling, manicured lawns of the suburbs far behind me. The transition from the chaotic, performative theater of my parents' backyard to the sterile geometry of the city mirrored my own internal shift. I parked my sedan in the designated concrete garage beneath my building. I rode the stainless steel elevator to the 3rd floor. My apartment resides inside a converted industrial warehouse. It features exposed brick walls, polished concrete floors, and tall windows overlooking the Cumberland River. The environment is orderly and deliberately sparse. There are no expensive ceramic baking dishes holding discount pastries. There are no imported luxury vehicles parked outside to impress neighbors. It is a controlled atmosphere where empirical data reigns and illusions hold zero currency. I unlocked the heavy iron door and stepped inside. The air was cool and smelled faintly of roasted coffee and old paper. I set my keys on the entryway table and walked directly to my home office. The space functions as a secondary command center for my corporate investigations. It contains a wide glass desk, dual high-definition monitors, and a commercial-grade laser printer. I sat in my ergonomic chair and woke the computer from its dormant state. The screens illuminated, casting a pale blue glow across the quiet room. The financial anomaly was already established. The $60,000 cashier check resting in the bank vault proved my grandfather was being actively exploited. The luxury truck parked in my parents' driveway proved my brother was the primary beneficiary of that exploitation. Now I needed to map the exact structural mechanism of the theft. Financial institutions operate on strict regulatory protocols. A commercial bank does not allow a 32-year-old man with a history of failed crypto startups to casually drain the retirement accounts of an elderly relative. Bypassing the security algorithms requires a key. It requires a specific legal instrument granting the bearer supreme statutory authority over the assets. I initiated my secure virtual private network. As a senior anti-money laundering investigator, I possess authorized access to specialized corporate databases, state registries, and municipal property portals. I routed my connection through the Tennessee Secretary of State business search engine. I needed to cross-reference the shell company the bank manager identified. I typed Crestview Holdings into the query field. The system processed the request and generated the organizational filings. The limited liability company was formed 8 months ago. The registered agent and primary managing member was Mason Foster. The principal business address listed on the paperwork was a generic post office box located in a strip mall 3 miles away from his apartment. He had constructed a hollow corporate vessel specifically designed to receive and wash illicit capital. But forming a shell company is merely the placement phase of the operation. He still needed the key to unlock my grandfather's vault. I shifted my focus to the county probate and property records. I searched Harrison Foster's legal name, filtering the results for any recent filings. The digital ledger populated a short list of documents. At the very top, recorded precisely 4 days before the formation of Crestview Holdings, was a durable power of attorney. I clicked the hyperlink to view the digitized instrument. The document loaded page by page on my right monitor. A durable power of attorney is an exceptionally dangerous legal tool when placed in the wrong hands. It grants the designated agent the unrestricted ability to liquidate portfolios, sell real estate, and authorize wire transfers on behalf of the principal individual. I bypassed the standard indemnification clauses and scrolled directly to the final signature block. The name Harrison Foster was printed in dark ink on the primary line. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the glass desk. The ambient hum of the central air conditioning faded into the background. I study fraudulent documentation for a living. A genuine signature from an 82-year-old man suffering from cognitive decline and age-related tremors features distinct microscopic hesitations. The ink pools slightly where the pen catches against the grain of the paper. The strokes are frail and uneven. The signature displayed on my screen lacked those fundamental stutters. The ink flowed with a smooth, uninterrupted confidence. But the spatial distribution of the letters was deeply flawed. The kerning between the double consonants was erratic. I recognized that specific rhythmic spacing. I had watched my brother write birthday cards, grocery lists, and failed business proposals for 3 decades. Mason possessed a distinct habit of lifting his pen between vowels to mimic cursive script, resulting in a disjointed, uneven tilt. He had not simply guided a confused old man into signing a document. Mason sat at a desk, held a pen, and meticulously forged our grandfather's identity. He manufactured a legally binding skeleton key. With the mechanism identified, I needed to calculate the total extraction. I opened a secondary forensic tracking program utilized by my corporate firm to aggregate suspected illicit transfers. I ran a comprehensive search linking the forged power of attorney to the receiving accounts associated with Crestview Holdings. The software required nearly 2 minutes to compile the historical ledger. I watched the progress bar inch across the screen. When the data packet decoded the resulting numbers, stole the breath from my lungs. The $60,000 bank draft my grandfather slipped into my pocket was not an isolated incident. It was merely the final remaining scrap of a decimated legacy. Over the past 8 months, Mason had executed 17 distinct wire transfers. He liquidated municipal bonds. He drained high-yield mutual funds. He emptied a traditional savings account Harrison had maintained since the late 1980s. I aligned the decimal points on a digital spreadsheet and calculated the sum. The total stolen capital registered at exactly $400,000. My brother had systematically strip-mined an elderly man's entire history. He converted 40 decades of disciplined savings into untaxed digital currency and a $90,000 custom pickup truck. He stood on a suburban patio drinking craft beer and bragging about his thriving business acumen, while the man he robbed sat 20 feet away, staring blankly at the grass. The betrayal was staggering in its pure predatory scope. The logical reaction for a granddaughter discovering this level of devastation would be immediate volcanic rage. A standard family member would pick up a cellular phone, dial the brother's number, and scream accusations into the receiver until their vocal cords frayed. They would demand a tearful confession. They would threaten to drive back to the barbecue and expose the theft in front of the entire neighborhood. I did not touch my phone. I did not shed a single tear. Noise is the enemy of accuracy. Confronting a narcissist without securing the perimeter only provides them with the tactical advantage of preparation. If I called Mason, he would immediately deny the forgery. He would contact an aggressive defense attorney. He would empty the Crestview Holdings accounts, routing the remaining stolen funds into decentralized offshore wallets before the sun rose on Monday morning. I prefer the cold, unyielding satisfaction of a documented paper trail. I reached into the bottom drawer of my desk and retrieved a pristine black legal binder. I reserve black binders exclusively for cases involving structural, systemic fraud. I initiated the printing sequence. The laser machine hummed, processing the raw data. I printed the certified copy of the forged power of attorney, highlighting the erratic spacing of the fabricated signature. I printed the state organizational filings for the shell company, proving Mason's sole ownership. I printed the aggregated bank transfer logs detailing the systematic theft of $400,000. I gathered the warm sheets of paper from the output tray. I used a heavy-duty punch to perforate the left margins. I placed the documents inside the binder and snapped the metal rings closed. The crisp, sharp click echoed in the silent office. The black portfolio now contained the complete anatomical blueprint of a sprawling federal crime. I ran my hand over the smooth, dark cover. My brother was a felon. He was facing decades in a federal penitentiary for wire fraud and elder exploitation. The trap was meticulously documented and ready to spring. But forensic investigations rarely end with a single suspect. A financial parasite requires a permissive environment to operate on this scale. Mason drove a vehicle worth nearly 6 figures and bragged about his sudden wealth in front of our parents every single Sunday. Brenda and Gary managed a middle-class logistics salary, but they suddenly possessed the disposable income to host lavish catered events and hire professional landscapers. I opened the spreadsheet detailing the outgoing disbursements from Crestview Holdings. I needed to see exactly where Mason was routing the stolen capital after he washed it through his corporate shield. The ledger displayed the expected expenses. He paid a luxury auto dealership. He purchased high-end computer hardware. He funded expensive dinners at downtown steakhouses. Then a specific line item caught my attention. It was not a payment to a vendor or a digital currency exchange. It was a direct wire transfer executed 3 months ago for exactly $75,000. I traced the destination routing number provided on the clearinghouse log. The digits did not belong to a corporate entity. The prefix identified a joint consumer checking account held at a regional credit union. I recognized the routing sequence. It was the primary banking institution utilized by my parents. I sat back in my chair, the ergonomic mesh pressing firmly against my spine. The investigation had just breached a terrifying new threshold. I kept my eyes locked on the digital spreadsheet displaying the outgoing disbursements from Crestview Holdings. The ambient light from the dual monitors cast a pale blue wash across the glass surface of my desk. The apartment surrounding me was entirely quiet, but a deafening realization was echoing through my mind. The 9-digit routing sequence staring back at me belonged to a regional credit union headquartered right here in Nashville. I recognized the specific numeric prefix. It identified the joint consumer checking account held by my parents. A financial investigator learns early in their career that money possesses an infallible memory. Capital never moves without leaving a distinct footprint. The footprint on my screen indicated a direct wire transfer of $75,000. The funds originated from the shell corporation my brother Mason created using our grandfather's stolen identity. The destination was the primary household ledger, managed by Brenda and Gary Foster. The architecture of the betrayal expanded, fracturing the foundation of my entire reality. Until this exact second, I had operated under a specific assumption. I believed my parents were merely passive enablers. I assumed their desperate affection for their golden child blinded them to his sudden, unearned wealth. I thought they looked the other way while he drove a $90,000 luxury truck and bragged about a fabricated cryptocurrency brokerage, because acknowledging his deceit would shatter their curated suburban illusions. I was wrong. Looking the other way implies ignorance. Accepting a 5-figure wire transfer implies active participation. My parents were not oblivious bystanders standing on the periphery of an elder exploitation scheme. They were willing co-conspirators. I needed to establish the motive. $75,000 is a highly specific sum. A middle-class couple does not risk federal wire fraud charges to fund a minor cosmetic renovation or a brief tropical vacation. They risk federal prison when they are backed into a corner and facing total ruin. I shifted my focus to the keyboard. I opened a new secure browser tab and navigated to the Davidson County Public Records portal. My father, Gary, managed a mid-tier department at a local logistics firm. My mother, Brenda, generated zero independent income. Yet they hosted catered Sunday barbecues, employed professional landscapers, and maintained a sprawling 4-bedroom home in an affluent zip code. The mathematics of their lifestyle had always contained glaring structural flaws. I was about to locate the exact point where the structure buckled. I selected the property tax assessment database. I entered the street address of their pristine Nashville residence. The system processed the query, returning a digitized chronological ledger of their municipal tax history. I scrolled past the routine annual assessments and the standard property valuations. I focused my attention on the filings recorded during the previous winter. A stark red notification banner appeared on the screen denoting a severe legal encumbrance. It was a formal notice of state tax lien. I clicked the hyperlink to view the certified document. The details of their hidden financial nightmare materialized in crisp black text. My parents had failed to remit their property taxes for 3 consecutive years. They had ignored the initial warnings, the escalating fines, and the repeated municipal demands for payment. The county revenue office had finally placed a hard lien against the estate. The total delinquent balance, including statutory penalties and interest, was listed at exactly $72,419.18. In the state of Tennessee, a municipal tax lien is a lethal instrument. It grants the local government the supreme authority to seize the property and sell it at a public auction to satisfy the debt. The document explicitly stated that a foreclosure sale was scheduled for the first week of May. I cross-referenced the dates. The timing was a masterpiece of predatory coordination. The public auction warning was issued in late March. My parents were 6 weeks away from losing their beloved stage set. They were facing the ultimate suburban humiliation. They would be forced to pack their belongings into cardboard boxes and vacate the neighborhood while their affluent peers watched from the sidewalks. They panicked. They needed $72,000 in liquid cash to halt the county foreclosure. They could not secure a traditional bank loan due to the existing lien. They turned to the only available pool of unprotected capital. They looked at Harrison. My grandfather possessed a flawless financial footprint and $400,000 in disciplined, lifelong savings. He also suffered from advancing cognitive decline. He was a vulnerable target living under their own roof. The timeline locked together with unbreakable logic. In early April, Mason executed the forged durable power of attorney. He hijacked Harrison's identity and established Crestview Holdings. By mid-April, Mason had drained the initial wave of liquid assets from our grandfather's retirement accounts. On April 18th, Mason initiated the wire transfer. He routed $75,000 of stolen capital through his shell company and deposited it directly into Brenda and Gary's joint checking account. On April 20th, my father walked into the Davidson County Revenue Office and presented a cashier's check to satisfy the delinquent tax burden. I refreshed the property portal. The final entry on the ledger was a release of lien filed on April 22nd. The threat of the public auction was officially extinguished. The pristine suburban illusion was saved. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair. The synthetic mesh pressed firmly against my spine. My hands rested in my lap. I did not feel the erratic spike of an elevated heart rate. I felt a cold, heavy, hollow sensation settling deep within my chest. My parents had sacrificed the patriarch of our family to save their own pride. They watched Harrison sit in a wicker chair on their patio, wrapped in a thin blanket, staring vacantly at the grass, while they secretly spent his life savings to pay off their own municipal debts. They sold out a vulnerable elder so Brenda could continue serving generic peach cobbler in expensive ceramic dishes to impress neighbors who did not truly care about her. This was no longer a story about a greedy sibling stealing from a grandparent. The entire Foster household was a coordinated criminal syndicate. Mason functioned as the point man executing the forgery and the money laundering. Brenda and Gary functioned as the silent beneficiaries, accepting the stolen equity to erase their liabilities. They were all bound together by mutual treason. I opened the bottom drawer of my desk and retrieved the pristine black legal binder. I clicked the metal rings open. The sharp sound echoed in the quiet room. I sent the Davidson County tax lien documents and the corresponding release forms to the laser printer. I punched 3 holes in the warm sheets of paper and placed them directly behind the bank transfer logs. The black binder was growing thicker. It contained the anatomical blueprint of a multi-generational organized crime ring. If I handed this compilation to a federal task force, my brother and both of my parents would face immediate arrest. They would be indicted for conspiracy, wire fraud, and elder exploitation. I was the sole entity standing between my family and a federal penitentiary. I held the ledger that dictated their survival or their destruction. I closed the binder and ran my hand across the smooth, dark cover. The financial mathematics of the theft were fully documented. The motive was irrefutably established. But as an auditor, I am trained to look for the secondary anomalies. I am conditioned to follow the ripple effects of a depleted account. I looked at the notes on my desk. Mason had systematically transferred $400,000 out of Harrison's estate. The accounts were drained dry. But my grandfather required specialized medical attention. He received daily visits from an in-home nursing agency to manage his advancing dementia. That level of dedicated health care requires a staggering monthly expenditure. If the retirement savings were gone and my parents were too broke to pay their own property taxes, how are they funding Harrison's expensive medical care? A new discrepancy surfaced, demanding immediate investigation. I turned my attention back to the keyboard. I needed to access the state health registry logs. I needed to see who was paying the nursing agency. The investigation was about to breach a terrifying new threshold. The digital clock on my secondary monitor shifted to 2 a.m. The air inside my apartment was still and silent, carrying only the faint hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. I sat in my ergonomic chair, staring at the black legal binder resting on the glass surface of my desk. The architecture of my family was laid bare within those metal rings. I had documented the forged power of attorney, the creation of the Shell Corporation, and the $75,000 payoff my parents accepted to erase their municipal tax lien. The immediate mechanics of the theft were resolved. Mason stole $400,000 and distributed a portion to Brenda and Gary to secure their complicity. The ledger was empty. But in the realm of financial investigation, an empty ledger often generates a much louder alarm than a full one. My grandfather suffered from advancing cognitive decline. Managing his condition required an escalating level of specialized medical support. Harrison received daily visits from a private in-home nursing agency. A licensed registered nurse monitored his vital signs, administered his prescriptions, and ensured he did not wander away from the property. I know the exact arithmetic of healthcare logistics. High-tier memory care in the state of Tennessee is exorbitant. The monthly billing invoices for that level of dedicated supervision routinely hover near $9,000. If Mason had systematically drained the entirety of Harrison's liquid retirement assets over the past 8 months, the capital required to sustain that nursing contract was gone. Furthermore, my parents were drowning in delinquent property taxes prior to their illicit bailout. They clearly lacked the disposable income to fund a $9,000 monthly medical expense out of their own logistics salaries. Someone was cutting a substantial check to the nursing agency every 30 days to keep the medical staff walking through the front door. If the estate was empty and my parents were broke, a phantom funding source was sustaining my grandfather's survival. I turned my attention back to the keyboard. Anti-money laundering investigators trace illicit capital across multiple sectors. Our corporate software interfaces with regional healthcare billing clearinghouses to detect organized medical fraud. We look for phantom clinics, synthetic patient profiles, and ghost billing networks. I did not need to guess who was paying the nurses. I possess the credentials to pull the literal receipts. I opened a secure terminal and routed my connection through the state health registry logs. I navigated to the portal for TennCare, which is the Medicaid program managed by the state of Tennessee. I typed Harrison's legal name and his date of birth into the encrypted search fields. The system processed the query for several seconds before a patient profile populated on my primary monitor. The status indicator next to his name glowed a bright, vibrant green. It read, active. I clicked on the hyperlink to expand his coverage details. He was enrolled in the Choices program. That specific initiative provides state and federal funding for seniors requiring long-term care services, including in-home nursing support. I leaned closer to the screen, the blue light illuminating my face. The eligibility requirements for the Choices program are strict and unforgiving. Medicaid is a welfare program designed specifically for the indigent. To qualify for state-funded medical assistance, an individual applicant must possess less than $2,000 in total countable assets. 8 months ago, my grandfather possessed $400,000 in high-yield mutual funds and traditional savings. The strategy my brother executed crystallized in my mind with breathtaking predatory clarity. Mason did not merely forge a document to steal cash for a luxury truck and a fake cryptocurrency brokerage. He orchestrated a deliberate, systematic impoverishment. By draining Harrison's legitimate assets and hiding the capital within the opaque structure of Crestview Holdings, Mason intentionally rendered our grandfather destitute on paper. He stripped the estate bare and then submitted a fraudulent application to the state health department. He claimed the 82-year-old man possessed zero resources. The state of Tennessee reviewed the manipulated application, saw an empty bank account, and approved the welfare funding. The taxpayers were now unknowingly subsidizing the expensive in-home nursing care, while my brother drove a custom imported vehicle funded by the hidden wealth. My parents were fully aware of this dynamic. Brenda and Gary watched state-funded nurses arrive at their suburban home every single morning. They smiled, they offered the medical staff fresh coffee, and they accepted the free government labor while sitting on a $75,000 stolen equity bailout. This revelation fundamentally altered the trajectory of the investigation. The conflict had just breached a terrifying new threshold. Forging a power of attorney and embezzling funds from a relative is a severe state-level felony. But falsifying financial disclosures to secure government welfare benefits crosses into federal jurisdiction. Mason was defrauding the state of Tennessee and the federal government simultaneously. The stakes were no longer confined to a domestic dispute over a stolen inheritance. The stakes had become catastrophic. My chest felt tight. My pulse accelerated, beating a rapid warning rhythm against my wrists. I stared at the green active status indicator on the TennCare portal and realized the blast radius of their greed had just expanded to encompass my entire life. I am a senior anti-money laundering investigator. My professional existence is governed by the Bank Secrecy Act and strict federal compliance statutes. I hold a specialized certification that requires me to act as a mandated reporter. When an investigator uncovers verifiable evidence of structural financial fraud, they possess a non-negotiable legal obligation to file a suspicious activity report with the federal Treasury. The law does not offer exemptions for familial relationships. The federal government does not care if the perpetrator is your older brother or if the co-conspirators are your own parents. The statute regarding willful blindness is ruthless. If I closed my browser window, deleted my search history, and walked away from this discovery, I would transition from an innocent bystander into an active criminal accessory. Concealing knowledge of ongoing federal Medicaid fraud is a felony. If the authorities eventually uncovered Mason's shell corporation and traced his digital footprint, they would inevitably audit the entire family structure. They would review my employment credentials. They would realize I possessed the exact skills required to detect the crime. They would assume my silence was purchased. The Office of the Comptroller of the Currency would permanently strip my investigative license. My corporate firm would terminate my employment. I would face criminal prosecution for aiding and abetting a federal syndicate. I could lose my freedom, my townhouse, and my future. My family was not just toxic, they were lethal. Their unyielding obsession with performative wealth and suburban prestige was actively threatening my survival. They had constructed a financial bomb in the center of their pristine living room, and the timer was already counting down. I did not feel sorrow. I did not feel the lingering ache of a daughter realizing her parents were corrupt. Those emotions are useless when your liberty is under direct assault. I felt a cold, unyielding instinct for self-preservation taking root in my mind. I engaged the laser printer resting on the edge of my desk. I captured the screen displaying the active TennCare enrollment. I downloaded the statutory eligibility requirements, highlighting the strict $2,000 asset limit. I printed the digital cross-references connecting the date of the Medicaid approval to the exact week Mason finished draining the final dollars from the probate accounts. The printer deposited the warm, crisp pages into the output tray. I gathered the sheets of paper, aligning the edges with deliberate precision. I punched the necessary holes along the margins. I opened the black legal binder. I placed the Medicaid fraud documentation behind the property tax records and the forged bank transfers. I snapped the metal rings closed, locking the final piece of the puzzle into place. The dossier was flawless. It was a weapon of pure, unmitigated systemic destruction. But a weapon of this magnitude cannot be wielded in a casual setting. I could not simply confront my brother in a hallway or drop an anonymous tip into a generic hotline. Mason's shell company was actively holding the stolen assets. My parents were actively benefiting from the fraudulent tax lien payoff. The federal government was actively paying the nursing agency. I needed to halt the entire apparatus simultaneously without triggering a panic that would cause my brother to move the funds offshore. I needed to initiate a controlled demolition. I closed the black cover of the binder. I picked up my mobile device from the desk. I opened my encrypted professional directory. I bypassed my standard corporate contacts and scrolled down to a specialized list of regulatory liaisons. I located the direct secure contact information for a senior supervisor at the Tennessee Adult Protective Services Division. Right below it, I found the direct line for an agent I frequently coordinated with on the Federal Financial Crimes Task Force. I could not wait for the impending Sunday barbecue. I could not allow the fraud to persist for another 48 hours while I formulated a social strategy. I needed to secure the perimeter immediately. I drafted a brief, highly classified email requesting an emergency joint conference. I stated that I possessed documented evidence of a sprawling elder exploitation ring involving synthetic insolvency and active Medicaid fraud. I requested a secure meeting room away from my corporate office. I hit send. The message vanished into the encrypted network. I turned off my dual monitors. The screens went dark, plunging the home office into shadows. I sat in the quiet room, waiting for the sun to rise. The silent phase of my data collection was over. It was time to hand the blueprints of my family directly to the authorities. The morning sun reflected off the glass facades of downtown Nashville, casting sharp geometric angles across the damp pavement. I drove my sedan toward the Federal Plaza. My encrypted email from the previous night had triggered an immediate response. When a senior anti-money laundering investigator flags a multi-agency jurisdiction case involving elder exploitation and federal welfare fraud, the bureaucratic machinery accelerates. I parked in a secured subterranean garage and navigated the concrete corridors to the designated security checkpoint. I surrendered my coat and leather briefcase to the scanning belt. I retrieved my items and rode the steel elevator to the 7th floor. The designated conference room was a sterile, windowless cube. It featured a long laminate table, rigid aluminum chairs, and pale fluorescent lighting that drained the warmth from the air. Waiting for me were two individuals who dealt with the darkest corners of human greed. Special Agent Holden represented the Federal Financial Crimes Task Force. He wore a standard dark suit and maintained a posture of perpetual skepticism. Seated across from him was Supervisor Miller from Tennessee Adult Protective Services. She possessed the tired, calculating eyes of a woman who had seen families trade their morals for real estate far too many times. I took the empty chair at the head of the table. I did not engage in preliminary small talk about the morning traffic or the autumn weather. I placed my leather tote on the floor and extracted the black legal binder. I set the binder on the laminate surface. I clicked the metal rings open. The sharp, mechanical sound echoed off the bare walls. I began the audit. I walked them through the initial anomaly. I presented the certified copy of the $60,000 cashier check my grandfather had slipped into my pocket. I produced the routing verification, proving the funds originated from a commercial shell entity named Crestview Holdings. Agent Holden leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. His initial skepticism began to recede, replaced by the rigid focus of a predator catching a distinct scent. I turned the page and displayed the durable power of attorney. I pointed to the fabricated signature on the bottom line. I explained the spatial distribution errors and the distinct downward slant linking the forgery directly to my brother Mason. I laid out the aggregate bank transfer logs documenting the systematic extraction of $400,000 from Harrison Foster's retirement accounts. Supervisor Miller picked up the forged instrument, studying the blue ink strokes. A sibling draining an estate is a common tragedy, she noted, her voice carrying a dry, clinical cadence. It is a severe state felony, but it usually remains a localized domestic issue. I turned to the next section of the binder. I assured her the betrayal was not localized. I presented the Davidson County tax lien records. I showed them the $72,419 debt threatening my parents' pristine suburban home. I followed it with the disbursement ledger from Mason's Shell Company. I traced the $75,000 wire transfer routed directly into Brenda and Gary Foster's joint checking account just 2 days before the municipal lien was released. My parents did not merely ignore my brother's theft, I explained. They accepted a 5-figure payout to erase their own debt. They are active co-conspirators in the exploitation of their own patriarch. The atmosphere inside the windowless room grew heavy. The federal agent and the state supervisor exchanged a brief, knowing glance. The architecture of a syndicate was forming on the table before them, but the final payload remained hidden. I turned to the last section of the dossier. I slid the printed screenshots of the 10-Care Choices Registry across the laminate surface. My brother did not just steal the capital, I stated, maintaining a cold, rhythmic delivery. He orchestrated a synthetic impoverishment. By funneling the liquid assets into his hidden corporate shield, he rendered my grandfather destitute on paper. He used that fabricated insolvency to qualify Harrison for state and federal welfare benefits. The taxpayers are currently funding a $9,000 per month in-home nursing contract while the stolen wealth finances my brother's luxury pickup truck and my parents' catered Sunday barbecues. Agent Holden stopped breathing for a fraction of a second. The muscle in his jaw flexed. Defrauding a federal medical program elevated the investigation from a routine elder abuse case into a high-priority federal target. He reached into his jacket pocket and retrieved a silver pen. He began writing rapid, precise notes on a legal pad. Supervisor Miller set the forged power of attorney down. Her expression hardened into a mask of pure statutory authority. "We can have a warrant drafted for your brother's arrest by tomorrow morning," Holden announced. "We can seize the luxury vehicle and freeze the parents' checking accounts." I raised my hand, halting his momentum. I denied his proposal. "A premature arrest is a tactical error," I explained, holding the gaze of the federal agent. "If you execute a warrant tomorrow morning, Mason will invoke his right to counsel. My parents will hire aggressive defense attorneys. They will tie this investigation up in endless civil litigation, claiming the funds were a gift and the Medicaid application was a clerical mistake. The remaining stolen capital hidden within the Crestview Holdings ledger will vanish into offshore, decentralized wallets before you can secure the final subpoenas." I needed the trap to remain silent. I proposed a different methodology. I instructed Supervisor Miller to petition the probate court for an emergency sealed conservatorship. Under specific Tennessee statutes regarding active elder exploitation, a judge can quietly strip a fraudulent power of attorney and appoint a neutral state fiduciary to govern the vulnerable individual's estate. "Because the conservatorship is sealed," I continued, "Mason will not receive a notification. He will believe his forged skeleton key still operates the vault. Meanwhile, Agent Holden can utilize the federal authority to tag the Crestview Holdings routing numbers. You establish a tracking protocol on the shell company. Every time my brother purchases a designer shirt, every time he fuels his truck, every time my parents spend a dime of their stolen equity, the federal network archives the transaction. You let them continue operating under the delusion of safety. You let them finance their own unassailable indictments." Holden stared at me. He recognized the cold, structural brilliance of the strategy. He nodded, confirming his agreement to the terms. I packed the black binder back into my tote bag. I left the federal building and drove back to my apartment. The statutory snare was officially armed. The authorities were watching the digital ledgers. The emergency conservatorship was winding through the sealed judicial channels. The trap was flawless on paper. But human variables are deeply unpredictable. Liars possess a highly tuned radar for shifting atmospheric pressure. As I unlocked my front door and stepped into my quiet living room, my intuition spiked. My brother and my mother were not content to wait in the shadows. They sensed a deviation in my behavior. They were already mobilizing to test the perimeter of their lie, and they were bringing their desperate illusions directly to my doorstep. The acoustic seal of my warehouse apartment provides a baseline of emotional safety that my parents' suburban residence can never duplicate. I returned from the downtown Federal Plaza at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. The quiet grid of the Sunset District-style concrete architecture surrounding my riverfront unit offered an environment governed entirely by logic. I placed my leather tote bag on the entryway table. Inside the dark fabric, the black legal binder remained hidden, containing the certified copies of the forged power of attorney, the county property tax lien, and the active state welfare fraud registry entries. The statutory net was armed, and the federal tracking algorithms were actively monitoring every routing node associated with Crestview Holdings. I walked into the kitchen to pour a fresh glass of cold water. Before the liquid could reach the brim of the glassware, the heavy iron knocker attached to my front door struck the solid wood. The impact was rhythmic, repetitive, and unannounced. I did not move with rapid urgency. I set the glass down on the quartz counter and walked down the narrow entry hallway. I peered through the security lens embedded in the door frame. The circular magnification warped the image, but the suspects were unmistakable. My mother, Brenda, stood on the polished concrete corridor, wearing a cream-colored trench coat. Beside her stood my older brother, Mason. He was dressed in his customary designer attire, but his eyes were darting erratically toward the elevator bank at the end of the hall. They had driven down from Shelby Township without transmitting a preliminary text message. When perpetrators feel the invisible shift in regulatory pressure, their internal panic forces them to cross physical boundaries to verify the blind spots of their victims. I turned the brass latch and pulled the door open. Brenda immediately stepped across the threshold, her face expanding into a wide, bright hostess expression that failed to register in the musculature around her eyes. She reached out, extending her arms to offer a small green plastic pot wrapped in crinkling decorative cellophane. Inside the container sat a generic, store-bought peace lily. The leaves were distinctly wilting at the margins, turning a dull yellow hue from a prolonged lack of light on a supermarket clearance shelf. A sticky residue remained on the plastic where a discount price label had been partially scraped away with a thumbnail. "Happy belated birthday, sweetheart," my mother chirped, her voice adopting that high, artificial register she reserved for public diplomacy. We felt completely terrible about the brief rush on Tuesday night, and we wanted to bring a little life into your beautiful apartment. I accepted the ceramic pot. The weight was light, indicating the root system was entirely dried out. It was a classic artifact of her maternal philosophy. She offered a cheap, thoughtless object, purchased for less than $5, and expected the transaction to secure a massive emotional dividend. She wanted to erase a physical assault in a hallway by delivering a dying plant to my entryway. Mason stepped into the living room behind her. He kept his hands shoved deep into the pockets of his linen trousers. He attempted to project the relaxed, unassailable posture of a thriving entrepreneur, but his physical tells were screaming. He refused to remove his sunglasses despite the dim interior lighting. His breathing was shallow, and his right heel tapped a frantic, silent rhythm against the hardwood floorboards. He was checking the perimeter. He wanted to see if the strike across my face had successfully managed my behavior, or if I was actively constructing a threat to his laundering network. "It is very peaceful in here." Avery Mason offered his tone, carrying a forced, brittle cheerfulness. "You always keep things so organized." "The corporate workload requires order," I replied, keeping my vocal register perfectly flat and devoid of conversational warmth. I walked into the kitchen and set the wilting plant on the edge of the counter. "Please come inside." My mother and brother moved toward the kitchen island, aligning themselves opposite my position. The counter functioned as a natural boundary. Brenda reached into her designer handbag and unclasped the leather flap. She withdrew a single sheet of standard white printer paper that had been folded into horizontal thirds. She smoothed the creases against the stone surface with the palm of her hand and pushed it toward my side of the ledger. "While we were organizing Grandpa's medical files yesterday, your father noticed we were missing a standard signature for the insurance coordinates," Brenda explained, her tone dropping into a soft, wounded pitch designed to invoke immediate compliance. "The home nursing agency requires an updated family trust disclosure to maintain the current state allocation. It is just a routine formality to help us keep his care structured properly." Mason reached into his shirt pocket and produced a heavy metal ballpoint pen. He set it down next to the paper. "We just need you to sign at the bottom line so we can drop it in the mail before the county office closes today," he added. His voice had a sharp, demanding edge hidden beneath the casual request. He was attempting to deploy the exact baseline conditioning our parents had utilized throughout our childhood. They raised me to view complex documentation as a tedious chore, expecting me to sign tax returns, indemnity waivers, and corporate insurance renewals without ever reading the text. They treated my reliability as a blank check to fund their golden child. I did not pick up the pen. I leaned forward, resting my weight against the stone counter, and scanned the printed text. I analyze fraudulent instruments for 40 hours a week. I do not read documents for context. I read them for legal liability. The title at the top of the page was masked under a generic heading, but the primary clauses were clear. It was not an insurance verification form. It was a comprehensive, retroactive, non-disclosure agreement and mutual liability waiver. The architecture of their panic was beautifully transparent. Mason and my parents realized that my sudden departure from the Sunday barbecue meant their perimeter was vulnerable. They knew I possessed the professional skills to audit the Crestview Holdings accounts. They were terrified that the $60,000 check my grandfather slipped into my pocket would guide me directly to the state welfare registry. This paper was a legal shield. If I affixed my standard signature to that line, I would legally forfeit my right to contest the administration of Harrison's estate. I would be signing a binding contract immunizing Mason from any future civil discovery, regulatory audit, or criminal fraud disclosure. I would be legally validating the theft of $400,000 and protecting his luxury truck in exchange for a dying supermarket lily. My mother watched my eyes move across the print. The physical indicators of her anxiety intensified. A faint, involuntary tremor shook her left index finger, causing her silver rings to click faintly against the quartz island. Mason shifted his weight, his jaw locking tight as he waited for a refusal. They expected me to either comply blindly or initiate a screaming match that would allow them to deploy their defensive gaslighting strategies. I did not scream. Noise is the enemy of accuracy. If I refused to sign, they would realize their cover story had failed. Mason would leave my apartment, dial his defense attorney, and immediately move the remaining stolen capital into offshore, decentralized cryptocurrency wallets before the federal task force could finalize the sealed conservatorship. I needed them to feel completely victorious. I needed them to believe their amateur deception had pacified the investigator. I picked up the heavy metal pen. I adjusted the paper, aligning it with the edge of the counter. During my initial federal training, the Financial Crimes Task Force instructed us on specific nonverbal signaling protocols utilized during corporate hostage situations and forced bank transactions. It is called a duress signature. When an investigator is required to sign an instrument under coercion, they alter the exact geometric slant and internal spacing of their cursive vowels. To a standard observer, the name appears legitimate. But when the document is processed through a forensic graphology matrix, the altered alignment provides legally provable evidence that the signature was executed under intimidation and holds zero binding authority. I placed the tip of the pen against the paper. I signed my name. I deliberately shifted the slant of my vowels, shifting the cursive loops 10 degrees to the left of my normal vertical alignment. I widened the kerning between the letters, creating a measurable anomaly. The ink flowed smoothly. The endorsement looked authentic to an amateur eyes, but on a forensic level, it was an active distress beacon. I finished the final stroke and laid the pen down on the counter. I pushed the paper back across the quartz island. "There you go," I said, managing my expression into a tight, calm smile. I know how important it is to keep Grandpa's care structured. Mason reached out and snatched the document with a rapid, predatory speed. He scanned the signature line, ensuring the ink spelled out my name. He let out a long, heavy breath, his shoulders dropping 2 inches in visible relief. The tension evaporating from his frame was almost audible. He looked at Brenda and offered a brief, triumphant nod. The perimeter was secured. They believed the quiet sibling had swallowed the bait. "We appreciate you being so reasonable, Avery," my mother said, her artificial hostess lilt returning in full force as she slid the paper back into her bag. "We know you are busy with your bank audits. We will let you get back to your weekend." I walked them to the entryway. I opened the heavy iron door and watched them step back onto the concrete corridor. They did not look back as they walked toward the elevator bank. Their steps were light, confident, and entirely oblivious. I closed the door and turned the brass lock. The heavy mechanical click signaled the end of the gaslighting phase. I walked back into the kitchen. I picked up the green plastic pot containing the wilting peace lily. I carried it over to the large stainless steel trash container resting near the pantry. I stepped on the foot pedal, lifting the lid, and dropped the plant directly into the bin. It landed with a heavy, muffled thud against the metallic bottom. I returned to my home office desk. The dual monitors were still glowing with the digital footprint of the Davidson County tax liens and the state Medicaid registry logs. My family believed they had bought themselves permanent immunity with a $4 plant and a forged waiver. They had no idea that the duress signature I had just handed them was the final physical evidence required to document their intimidation. The federal snare was tightening, and the clock was continuing to count down. The heavy iron door of my warehouse apartment clicked shut. I engaged the deadbolt and turned the secondary brass lock. The metallic sequence echoed through the quiet entryway. I stood in the foyer and listened to the retreating hum of the elevator, carrying my mother and my brother down to the street level. They were driving back to their suburban colonial, assuming they had successfully neutralized the threat to their laundering network. They believed a wilting grocery store plant and a forged liability waiver had secured my permanent silence. I walked into the kitchen and stood before the quartz island. The overhead pendant lights cast a sharp glow across the surface. Resting on the polished stone was the small green plastic pot wrapped in crinkling decorative cellophane. The peace lily inside was dying. The leaves were turning a dull yellow hue from a prolonged lack of light and moisture. A sticky residue remained on the plastic, where a discount clearance label had been partially scraped away. This was the currency they believed my loyalty was worth. They stole my grandfather's financial security to fund an elaborate six-figure illusion for Mason, and they offered me a clearance rack botanical as compensation. I picked up the ceramic container. The weight was light, indicating the root system was entirely dehydrated. I carried the plant over to the large stainless steel trash receptacle situated near the pantry. I stepped on the foot pedal. The lid lifted with a soft mechanical hiss. I dropped the peace lily directly into the bin. It landed with a heavy, muffled thud against the metallic bottom, joining the discarded coffee filters and junk mail. I did not attempt to water the soil. I did not attempt to salvage the roots. You cannot revive something that is structurally dead. I dried my hands on a linen towel. I pulled one of the elevated stools away from the island and sat down. The physical confrontation was over. The performative family interaction had concluded. It was time to return to the mathematics of my survival. I opened my laptop and woke the screen from its dormant state. The device illuminated, casting a crisp blue light across the stone counter. I logged into my secure, encrypted network. I opened the communication channel linked to the Federal Financial Crimes Task Force and the State Adult Protective Services Division. The bureaucratic machinery of the government operates with a distinct, methodical rhythm. It does not move with sudden emotional outbursts or frantic hallway arguments. It moves through sworn affidavits, sealed warrants, and coordinated asset forfeiture protocols. I opened a fresh spreadsheet to calculate the exact timeline of the impending fallout. In the realm of financial crime investigation, an emergency conservatorship acts as the initial wedge. The probate judge in Davidson County was currently reviewing the petition submitted by Supervisor Miller. Once the judge stamped the judicial seal, my grandfather's remaining assets would be legally frozen and transferred to a neutral state fiduciary. Mason would lose his statutory key to the vault without receiving a single notification. But the federal task force required a precise operational window to align their crosshairs. Agent Holden was currently drafting the seizure warrants. Under civil asset forfeiture laws, the government possesses the supreme authority to confiscate any property purchased with illicit capital or utilized to facilitate a financial crime. I mapped the targets on my digital ledger. The first asset on the list was the custom-ordered pickup truck parked in my parents' suburban driveway. Mason utilized the stolen funds from Crestview Holdings to acquire the vehicle, integrating the dirty money into a tangible luxury item. The federal agents would seize the truck, securing it in a municipal impound lot. The second target was the shell company itself. The federal treasury would lock the commercial bank accounts associated with Crestview Holdings, halting any further laundering phases and freezing the remaining stolen capital in a secure digital vault. The third and most devastating target was the pristine four-bedroom home in Nashville. Brenda and Gary accepted a $75,000 wire transfer from the fraudulent limited liability company to erase their delinquent municipal tax lien. Because they infused stolen equity directly into the foundation of their primary residence, the house was now classified as the fruit of a criminal enterprise. The federal agents would place a hard lien on the property deed. My parents would lose their stage set. I reviewed the tracking timeline provided by the investigative liaisons. The warrants were slated to be finalized and signed by a federal magistrate by Thursday afternoon. The coordinated raid was scheduled for Friday morning. The government task force was preparing to dismantle the entire foster family ecosystem before the weekend commenced. The trap was meticulously set. It was heavily documented. It was statutorily sound. I leaned back against the wooden frame of the stool. I felt a deep structural exhaustion settle into my shoulders, but my mind operated with a sharp, burning clarity. I was the sole entity standing between my family and a federal penitentiary, and I had already handed the blueprints of their crimes to the executioners. I closed the spreadsheet. Before I could shut down the operating system, a sharp electronic vibration buzzed against the granite counter. My cellular phone illuminated, casting a pale glow across the dark surface. I picked up the device. The screen displayed a new notification badge. It was a message in the family group thread. Brenda was initiating a new directive. She did not text to check on my well-being. She did not ask if I had reviewed the fake trust disclosure she attempted to force upon me earlier that evening. She was pivoting to the next phase of her social calendar. I unlocked the hardware and opened the application. The message from my mother was lengthy and draped in synthetic enthusiasm. "Hi everyone," the text read. "We are finalizing the aesthetic details for the Family Heritage Gala this weekend. The country club requires our final head count by tomorrow morning. Avery, sweetheart, since you have been so busy with your bank audits lately, we want to make sure you take some time to celebrate with us. It is going to be such a beautiful evening. We really need you there to complete the family portrait for the photographer." I read the words twice. The audacity was breathtaking in its structural perfection. The Family Heritage Gala is an elite annual event hosted at the most exclusive golf club in the city. It is a gathering designed specifically for affluent Nashville residents to project an aura of established generational wealth. Brenda and Gary view this gala as their personal coronation. They want to stand in an opulent ballroom, wearing expensive formal attire, mingling with local politicians and real estate developers. They needed to display their successful entrepreneurial son and their reliable, quiet daughter to the neighborhood. They were treating me like a necessary prop. They wanted to utilize my physical presence to project a unified front, validating their flawless suburban illusion to their wealthy peers. My parents genuinely believed they had outmaneuvered me. They thought the duress signature I provided on their forged liability waiver neutralized my threat. They assumed I was subdued, pacified, and entirely blind to the sprawling financial crimes they committed against Harrison. They expected me to put on a modest dress, drive to the country club, and smile for the camera, while they financed their champagne with my grandfather's stolen retirement funds. They wanted an audience for their victory lap. I looked at the dark screen of my closed laptop where the federal seizure timeline was securely locked in the digital vault. The gala was scheduled for Saturday evening. The federal task force was preparing to execute the asset forfeiture warrants on Friday. My parents were planning a lavish celebration at a country club they would no longer be able to afford while residing in a house they would legally no longer own. They were organizing a party on a trap door. I tapped the text field at the bottom of the screen. I did not decline the invitation. I did not point out the sheer hypocrisy of their request. I typed a single word. Yes. I hit send. The confirmation vanished into the cellular network. I locked the phone and placed it face down on the island. I was going to attend the Family Heritage Gala. I was going to walk into that opulent ballroom and watch them perform their perfect lives. I would let them drink expensive wine and boast about their success. I was prepared to utilize their unyielding obsession with public optics as the very instrument of their destruction. The trap was primed, and the audience was gathering. The Thursday evening air inside my warehouse apartment felt stagnant and heavy. 2 days remained until the highly anticipated Family Heritage Gala. Outside the tall industrial windows, a light Tennessee rain tapped against the glass, creating a steady, rhythmic background noise. I sat alone at my mahogany dining table. The only illumination in the room came from a single overhead pendant light, casting a sharp, focused beam across the polished wood. The silence of the space offered a stark contrast to the sprawling financial conspiracy buzzing just beneath the surface of my familial relationships. I did not feel the sting of heartbreak. Heartbreak is an emotional luxury reserved for victims who do not possess the statutory evidence required to incinerate their predators. I am a senior investigator. I spend my days tracing phantom liabilities and dissecting corporate deception. I evaluate ledgers. Tonight, I was finalizing the ultimate audit report of my own life. I reached down to the floor and unzipped the main compartment of my leather work tote. I bypassed my laptop and extracted a specific item I had purchased earlier that afternoon from a high-end boutique in downtown Nashville. It was an elegant, heavy, rectangular gift box. The exterior was constructed of premium cardstock, featuring an intricate silver-embossed geometric pattern. It projected an aura of severe, undeniable wealth. My parents treated the upcoming gala at their elite country club as their personal coronation. They expected their affluent peers to admire their success. They required a tangible token to display on the gift table. They wanted a beautiful package to validate their flawless suburban illusion. I placed the empty silver vessel on the dining table. I did not purchase an expensive imported wine or a set of custom-engraved crystal glasses. I was preparing a payload that would strip the foundation directly from their future. I opened the bottom drawer of my briefcase and pulled out the pristine black legal binder. The metal rings clicked open with a sharp, definitive sound. I began the ceremonial assembly of their ruin. The first document I extracted was the emergency conservatorship order, signed by a Davidson County probate judge just hours ago. This single sheet of paper held profound legal weight. It formally nullified the fraudulent power of attorney my brother Mason had utilized to hijack my grandfather's estate. It placed Harrison under the immediate protection of a neutral state fiduciary. The courts had sealed the order, preventing any automated notifications from reaching my family. Mason no longer possessed the statutory keys to the vault. He was locked out, and he did not even know the locks had been changed. I placed the court order flat against the bottom of the silver box. I retrieved the next layer of evidence from the binder. I pulled the digitized access logs and the verified copy of the forged legal instrument. These pages detailed the exact timestamps of Mason's theft. They traced the $400,000 moving out of Harrison's legitimate retirement accounts and filtering into the illicit commercial shell entity known as Crestview Holdings. The documents proved the methodical extraction of an elderly man's legacy. I laid the forgery logs directly over the conservatorship decree. The third addition to the payload was the forensic graphology report regarding the retroactive liability waiver. Earlier in the week, Brenda and Mason had arrived at my apartment carrying a wilting grocery store plant. They attempted a preemptive strike, hoping to trick me into signing away my leverage to protect their laundering network. I had utilized a specialized duress signature, altering the slant of my vowels and widening the kerning to provide legally provable evidence of coercion. The certified forensic report highlighted those exact structural anomalies. It transformed their desperate gaslighting attempt into a documented act of intimidation. They assumed they had secured my permanent compliance. They had actually handed me the proof of their own predatory tactics. I smoothed the pages and placed the report over the access logs. The foundation of the trap was secure, but I needed to deliver the federal response. I reached back into the binder and extracted the civil asset forfeiture warrants drafted by Agent Holden and the Financial Crimes Task Force. These documents carried the supreme authority of the United States government. They outlined the immediate impending seizure of Mason's custom black pickup truck. My brother loved that imported vehicle. He used it to project the aura of a thriving crypto entrepreneur. The warrant ensured a federal contractor would tow the $90,000 asset to a municipal impound lot. The subsequent pages detailed the freezing of the commercial bank accounts tied to Crestview Holdings. The illicit capital was legally trapped. My brother was broke. He just had not checked his banking application yet. I added the federal warrants to the growing stack. There was one final piece of paper remaining. It was the most devastating component of the arsenal. I pulled the formal 24-hour notice of eviction drafted by the federal authorities. When Brenda and Gary accepted the $75,000 wire transfer to erase their municipal tax lien, they tethered their primary residence to a criminal enterprise. The infusion of stolen equity classified their pristine Nashville home as the fruit of an illicit operation. The federal government was seizing the property. The house, where they hosted their performative Sunday barbecues, no longer belonged to them. They were unauthorized occupants. They possessed less than a day before an asset recovery team arrived to change the brass locks on their front door. I placed the eviction notice at the very top of the stack. The paper payload fit flawlessly inside the heavy cardstock walls. It was an aesthetic masterpiece containing unmitigated systemic destruction. I placed the silver-embossed lid over the box. The fit was snug, pushing a faint breath of air out of the seams. I retrieved a spool of dark navy satin ribbon from my tote. I wrapped the ribbon around the structure, crossing the smooth fabric underneath, and bringing the ends to the top. I tied a precise, symmetrical bow. I pulled the loops taut, ensuring the presentation was immaculate. My mother worshipped visual aesthetics. She valued the outward projection of success above all underlying truth. She taught her children that presentation supersedes reality and that a beautiful surface can conceal any internal rot. I was honoring her core philosophy. I was delivering a flawless, luxurious exterior that disguised a catastrophic reality. The Trojan horse was officially armed. It was waiting for the Saturday evening reception. I picked up the heavy silver box. The weight of the paper inside felt substantial and grounding. I walked away from the dining table, moving silently down the short hallway toward the front entryway. I placed the anniversary offering on the console table directly next to my car keys and my leather purse. It sat there, catching the faint ambient illumination from the streetlights filtering through the front window glass. I walked back to the dining room and flipped the wall switch. The overhead pendant light turned off, plunging the townhouse into deep, quiet shadow. I stood in the dark and monitored my own physiology. My breathing was even. My pulse maintained a slow, steady rhythm. My hands did not tremble. The emotional toll of the familial betrayal had been processed and discarded during the silent, investigative grind. I felt the cold, profound relief of an auditor who has successfully balanced the ledger. The mathematics of their ruin were fully calculated. The variables were locked into their designated columns. The loud, performative relatives were preparing to step onto a stage they no longer owned, and I was ready to hand them the final bill. Saturday evening arrived with a crisp autumnal chill settling over the Tennessee Valley. I drove my practical sedan along the winding private roads leading toward the elite Belle Meade district. The dense canopy of ancient oak trees formed a natural tunnel, shielding the exclusive enclave from the mundane realities of the outside city. I bypassed the standard parking lot and pulled into the circular cobblestone driveway. Avery arrives at the upscale Nashville Country Club. A valet attendant wearing a pristine white uniform opened my door. I handed him the key fob. I stepped onto the illuminated pavement. I wore a tailored black wool suit featuring sharp, structured lapels and trousers cut with geometric precision. It was the exact uniform I utilized when walking into federal deposition hearings. It projected cold, undeniable authority. I did not carry a traditional evening purse. She carries the silver-embossed box under her arm, mingling with the guests drinking sparkling water. The sleek package rested securely against my ribs. The satin ribbon remained tied in a flawless, symmetrical bow. I walked through the towering glass double doors and surrendered my wool coat to the attendant in the foyer. The ambient noise of 100 overlapping conversations drifted down the corridor. I navigated the carpeted hallway and entered the primary events space. The ballroom is a spectacle of performative wealth packed with local politicians and affluent neighbors. The architecture featured vaulted ceilings, heavy crystal chandeliers, and expansive windows overlooking the manicured golf greens. Waiters in crisp, formal attire circulated through the crowd, offering silver trays loaded with artisan canapés and imported sparkling wines. This was the Family Heritage Gala. It was an annual gathering designed specifically to project an aura of established generational prosperity. My parents treated this event as their personal coronation. They required an audience to validate the pristine suburban illusion they had spent decades constructing. I walked over to the catering station and requested a glass of iced mineral water. I took a slow, deliberate sip, letting the carbonation burn slightly against the back of my throat. I turned my attention to the center of the room and began my forensic observation. My mother occupied the space near the grand piano. Brenda glides through the crowd, accepting praise for her devotion to the family patriarch. She wore a sweeping emerald green evening gown and her signature synthetic vanilla perfume. She was engaged in a deep, animated conversation with a local municipal judge and his wife. I watched her physical tells. She pressed a hand over her heart and lowered her chin, projecting the image of a weary but dedicated caretaker. She was recounting the heavy burden of managing my grandfather's advancing dementia. She was extracting deep reservoirs of sympathy from affluent peers who possessed no concept of the reality occurring behind her closed doors. She accepted their glowing compliments with practiced humility. The audience swooned over her supposed sacrifice. They praised her unwavering loyalty to the family patriarch. They did not know she had accepted a $75,000 wire transfer from a fraudulent shell company to erase her delinquent property taxes. They did not know the federal government was actively seizing the house she claimed to maintain so diligently. Avery smiles a tight, chilling smile. The irony was structural and perfect. I held my glass of water and shifted my gaze across the ballroom. My older brother commanded the area near the open bar. Mason works the room in a tailored suit exuding the charm of a devoted grandson. He held a crystal tumbler of expensive bourbon. He was surrounded by a tight circle of minor internet celebrities and local real estate investors. He projected the aura of a thriving, self-made titan. He was continuing his pitch, detailing the rapid scaling of his fabricated cryptocurrency brokerage. I observed his posture. His breathing was steady. His shoulders were relaxed. He showed zero physiological signs of the panic he had displayed during our Tuesday night physical altercation. He believed his preemptive gaslighting visit to my apartment had successfully pacified my suspicions. He thought the duress signature I provided on the retroactive liability waiver had secured his permanent immunity. He felt invincible, standing on a stage funded entirely by stolen capital. He laughed at a joke told by a wealthy donor. He reached up with his left hand to adjust the collar of his designer shirt. The movement caused the cuff of his tailored jacket to slide down his forearm. The ambient noise of the crowded ballroom faded into a dull, distant static. My pulse maintained a steady rhythmic cadence, but my focus narrowed into a sharp, piercing tunnel. Avery notices the 10th layer of conflict resting on Mason's wrist is Harrison's vintage gold Rolex, a priceless heirloom Mason scavenged from the elder's bedroom. The heavy gold casing caught the light from the crystal chandeliers, refracting a bright amber gleam across the room. The dial featured an intricate mechanical face and a pristine sapphire crystal cover. The band was constructed of solid, polished gold links. My grandfather had purchased that specific timepiece over 40 years ago. He bought it to celebrate his retirement from a lifelong career in hardware sales. It represented decades of disciplined labor, endless early mornings, and the tangible reward of his own formidable endurance. Harrison wore that watch every single day of his life until the cognitive decline stripped away his daily routines. He kept it stored safely inside a velvet box on his bedroom dresser. My brother had not just forged a legal instrument to drain $400,000 from the probate escrow accounts. Mason had walked into an 82-year-old man's bedroom, opened a velvet box, and extracted a priceless physical heirloom. He strapped it to his own wrist to complete the aesthetic of a successful crypto entrepreneur. Mason is literally wearing his grandfather's time while squandering his legacy. He was parading a tangible piece of my family history in front of 100 strangers, using a stolen artifact to legitimize his own counterfeit existence. He had mortgaged our grandfather's financial security to buy a luxury pickup truck, and he had raided the bedroom to provide the correct accessories for the victory lap. I did not drop my water glass. I did not march across the carpeted floor and demand he unbuckle the heavy gold clasp. Confrontation in a crowded ballroom only generates noise, and noise provides liars with an opportunity to construct a defense. I kept my hands resting loosely on the silver-embossed gift box tucked under my arm. I looked at the gold casing gleaming against Mason's cuff. I looked at Brenda, dabbing her dry eyes with a pristine handkerchief. She watches them boast about their success, entirely blinded by their own arrogance, waiting for the spotlight to validate their illusions. They were performing their perfect lives. They were extracting social currency and wearing stolen heirlooms. They felt untouchable standing in the opulent country club they had accessed, using the capital drained from my grandfather's accounts. They possessed no concept of the legal avalanche currently suspended directly above their heads. They did not know the emergency conservatorship was already signed by a probate judge, locking Mason out of the estate. They did not know the federal task force was finalizing the asset forfeiture warrants for the luxury truck and the commercial shell accounts. They did not know their pristine 4-bedroom home was slated for an impending forced eviction. I took another slow sip of water. I watched them spend their final hours of unearned prestige. The reception reached its natural midpoint. The initial rush for catered appetizers subsided. The guests settled into comfortable, networked conversations. Brenda recognized the shift in the room's energy. It was the optimal moment to command their attention and deliver the keynote toast. She signaled to the event coordinator stationed near the back wall. The string quartet concluded their classical arrangement and set their instruments down. The main chandeliers dimmed slightly, focusing the illumination directly onto the raised platform at the front of the hall. The stage was set. The audience was moving to their seats. I adjusted my grip on the Trojan horse. The forensic audit was about to transition into the public record. The classical arrangement performed by the hired string quartet faded into a lingering, resonant silence. The musicians lowered their bows and set their instruments to the side. The catering staff retreated to the perimeter of the ballroom, their silver serving trays resting against their hips. The amber illumination from the heavy crystal chandeliers seemed to focus entirely on the center stage. My mother stood on the elevated wooden platform, holding a crystal champagne flute in her right hand. She raised a silver cocktail spoon and tapped the metal against the delicate rim of the glass. The sharp, rhythmic chime cut through the low hum of affluent networking, commanding immediate attention from the crowded floor. 200 guests turned their focus toward the front of the room. Brenda wore a sweeping emerald green evening gown that projected the effortless grace of a dedicated matriarch. Her posture was relaxed yet commanding. She understood the intricate optics of a country club gathering. This lavish reception was not a celebration of our heritage. It was a carefully engineered public relations campaign. My mother needed the local politicians, her wealthy neighbors, and the affluent country club board members to witness this performance. She needed them to serve as character witnesses to validate her pristine suburban illusion. She wanted them to testify that she was a devoted, flawless caretaker who sacrificed her own comfort to manage my grandfather's advancing dementia. She was standing on a stage funded by stolen equity, preparing to extract deep reservoirs of sympathy from a captive audience. Thank you all for gathering here tonight, Brenda began, her voice echoing through the high-fidelity audio system. It was rich with manufactured emotion. A heritage is a significant milestone. It is a testament to shared dreams, shared challenges, and unwavering devotion to the people who paved the way for our success. She paused, scanning the audience, ensuring she made direct eye contact with the most influential figures seated near the front row. She was selling them a narrative of domestic stability. A woman who anchors her household is a woman worthy of neighborhood reverence. She did not look like a woman who had accepted a $75,000 wire transfer from a fraudulent shell company to erase her delinquent property taxes. She did not look like a woman who watched state-funded Medicaid nurses arrive at her home every morning while she hid her father's actual wealth in a secret commercial ledger. Family is built on a foundation of sacrifice, she continued, placing her free hand over her heart. It requires stepping up when the world tests your resolve. As many of you know, my father, Harrison, has been facing a difficult season of cognitive decline. Managing his care has been the most profound challenge of my life. But looking out at this room, looking at my beautiful children, I am reminded why we endure these trials. We do it to preserve the legacy for the next generation. A soft, collective murmur of admiration rippled through the ballroom. The wives of the corporate executives dabbed the corners of their eyes with pristine linen napkins. They were swooning over the sheer romance of the lie. 2 chairs away from me, Gary sat beaming with unearned pride. My father wore a sharp, dark suit, playing the role of the supportive pillar. He patted his chest, projecting the image of a man unburdened by debt. Across the table, Mason leaned back in his chair, holding a tumbler of expensive bourbon. My older brother looked incredibly smug, secure in the delusion that his illicit laundering network was operating flawlessly. He laughed quietly, soaking up the warm glow of our mother's fabricated integrity. Resting against his cuff, catching the glare of the stage lights, was my grandfather's vintage gold Rolex. Mason was literally wearing the stolen time of the man our mother was currently pretending to honor. But a legacy cannot be sustained alone, Brenda said, her voice cracking with rehearsed perfection. She extended her hand toward the primary table. It requires the quiet strength of the people working tirelessly behind the scenes. Avery has always been our steady foundation. She is the reliable force guiding our family through every storm. I wanted to host this gathering to publicly declare my gratitude to her and to invite her up here for a special family tribute. The room erupted into polite, sustained applause. The spotlight shifted, catching my figure in the chair. I did not hesitate. I picked up the heavy, silver-embossed gift box resting on the white tablecloth in front of me. The thick cardstock felt substantial beneath my fingers. It contained the certified emergency conservatorship orders, the forensic handwriting report, proving my duress signature, the state registry filings for Mason's shell company, and the printed federal seizure warrants. I topped the stack with the formal 24-hour eviction notice for my parents' pristine Nashville home. I stood up. My posture was rigid and authoritative. I wore a structured black wool suit featuring sharp lapels and tailored trousers. It was my professional armor. I did not walk with the bashful hesitation of a swooning, overwhelmed daughter. I navigated the narrow spaces between the round banquet tables with the measured, deliberate cadence of a senior investigator entering a hostile environment. The wooden stairs leading to the platform felt solid beneath my low heels. I ascended the steps, stepping into the blinding glare of the stage lights. Brenda stepped forward to meet me. She reached out, aiming to pull me into a theatrical embrace, eager to secure the photographic evidence for her social media channels. I stopped just outside her physical reach. I shifted the silver box to my left arm, creating a barrier. She lowered her hands, a brief flicker of genuine confusion passing behind her eyes. She assumed I was merely nervous about the public speaking arrangement. She offered a tight, encouraging nod and handed me the microphone. The metal cylinder was warm from her grip. I looked out over the sea of faces. 200 affluent guests stared back at me, their expressions molded into polite expectation. I saw the real estate developers checking their luxury watches. I saw the country club board members waiting for the emotional climax of the evening. I saw Gary, smiling, oblivious to the federal snare tightening around his property. I saw Mason adjusting the stolen vintage timepiece on his wrist. They were waiting for me to recite my assigned lines. They expected a tearful declaration of gratitude. They expected the reliable cash machine to validate their illusion. My mother is correct about one specific concept, I said. My voice carried through the surround sound speakers, stripping away the ambient warmth of the room. The tone was flat, clinical, and devoid of any sentimental inflection. A true family legacy is indeed built on a foundation of sacrifice and honoring our elders. I paused, letting the echo fade into the vaulted ceiling. But honoring an elder is a hollow, useless metric without the framework of total financial transparency. The polite smiles in the front row faltered. The applause had died moments ago, but the subsequent silence grew heavy, pressurized by the sudden, sharp shift in my vocal register. The executives recognized the tone immediately. It was the sound of a corporate audit commencing. Gary shifted his weight. A thin layer of perspiration materialized on his forehead, catching the stage lights. He glanced at the sound technician in the back corner, then looked back at me, his jaw tightening. This was not the script he had drafted. He expected submission. He was receiving an indictment. I turned to face my brother. I did not raise my voice. I did not display a single ounce of emotional distress. Noise is the enemy of accuracy, and I required the audience to hear every single syllable of my arithmetic. I held the heavy silver-embossed box out toward his chest. You speak eloquently about the sacrifices required to maintain this household. I continued maintaining unyielding eye contact with Mason. You speak about securing our future and protecting our foundation. I believe a family gathering of this magnitude demands an exchange of tangible, verifiable value. Mason looked down at the elegant packaging. His breathing hitched, but a greedy, reflexive instinct caused him to reach out his hands. He took the box. He assumed the heavy silver foil contained an expensive token of my appreciation, or perhaps the finalized retroactive liability waiver he thought he forced me to sign. He believed his preemptive gaslighting in my apartment earlier that week had worked perfectly. He thought I was handing him a reward for his flawless deception. He thought he had won. This box contains the exact blueprint of our next chapter, I stated. I lowered the microphone slightly, forcing the captivated audience to strain and listen to the verdict. It contains the routing numbers, the property deeds, and the certified legal orders that define the true structural foundation of this family. I took a half step back, leaving him isolated in the center of the spotlight. He held the box awkwardly, his thumbs pressing into the satin ribbon. The blood began to drain from his face as the sheer, metallic coldness of my words penetrated his arrogance. I want you to open your tribute. Right here, Mason, I instructed, projecting my voice across the quiet, breathless ballroom. Open it in front of your corporate investors, your affluent neighbors, and your parents, because the documents inside that silver box are about to redefine the entire trajectory of your future. Mason stood under the harsh amber stage lights holding the heavy silver embossed box. He rested his thumb against the smooth edge of the lid. He believed he was holding an expensive token of my appreciation, or perhaps the finalized retroactive liability waiver he thought he had forced me to sign. He assumed I was handing him a tangible reward for his flawless deception. He reached for the dark navy satin ribbon. His fingers hooked the flawless fabric, pulling the knot apart. The ribbon fell away, slipping over his tailored tuxedo jacket and dropping onto the wooden platform. He lifted the thick cardstock lid, expecting to find velvet and polished metal. He found a dense stack of certified legal paper. I watched his dark eyes scan the top document. It was the formal 24-hour eviction notice drafted for our parents' suburban residence, resting directly above the federal asset forfeiture warrant for his custom black pickup truck. Beneath those distinct warnings lay the forensic handwriting analysis proving his coercion and the certified digital access logs tracing his bank fraud. The healthy flush of his skin drained swiftly, leaving a sickly, ashen pallor. His jaw slackened. The polished, thriving entrepreneur persona crumbled into dust. His breathing became a series of shallow, ragged gasps. He gripped the edges of the box so tight the thick cardboard began to buckle under the pressure. I did not yield the microphone. I did not lower my gaze. I turned my attention away from my paralyzed brother and addressed the 200 corporate investors, affluent neighbors, and extended relatives seated in the ballroom. A true legacy requires a clean ledger, I stated, my voice carrying a cold, rhythmic cadence through the surround sound speakers. Last spring, my brother initiated a sprawling, multi-tiered financial conspiracy. A collective murmur rippled through the front tables. The executives who had just applauded his entrepreneurial spirit now stared at him with narrowed, calculating eyes. Affluent professionals detest financial liability. They recognized a sinking ship and they began calculating their distance from the wreckage. Mason did not build a successful logistics firm. I continued delivering the arithmetic to ensure every guest understood the depth of the betrayal. 8 months ago, he executed a fraudulent, durable power of attorney. He forged our grandfather's signature to hijack a flawless financial footprint. He utilized that fabricated authority to systematically extract $400,000 from legitimate retirement accounts. I paused, letting the staggering 6-figure sum echo off the high ceilings. The catered waitstaff froze in the aisles, holding their silver trays suspended in midair. He routed those stolen funds into a commercial shell entity named Crestview Holdings, I said, maintaining a cold, unyielding delivery. He washed the stolen capital to purchase his imported $90,000 vehicle and fund his designer wardrobe. I shifted my focus to table 14, where my parents sat frozen in the spotlight. Gary was gripping the edge of the heavy white linen tablecloth. The knuckles on his hands were stark white, straining against the skin. Brenda sat paralyzed, her chest heaving with shallow, panicked breaths. But a financial parasite rarely operates in isolation, I announced, projecting my words to reach the back of the banquet hall. My parents realized their golden child possessed unearned wealth. They also faced a catastrophic municipal tax lien on their pristine Nashville residence. Instead of reporting the theft and protecting a vulnerable elder, they accepted a bribe. I watched Gary swallow hard, his throat working uselessly. They accepted a wire transfer of exactly $75,000 from the fraudulent shell company I informed the captivated audience. They used my grandfather's stolen legacy to erase their own debt and save their suburban stage set from a public foreclosure auction. Brenda let out a sharp, jagged gasp. She pressed both hands against her mouth, her emerald green evening gown rustling harshly as she shuddered. The ballroom plunged into a suffocating, pressurized silence. The affluent neighbors and local politicians stepped backward, physically distancing themselves from the radioactive fallout. Their greed did not stop at embezzlement, I declared, delivering the final, devastating payload. By draining the legitimate assets and hiding the capital inside a fake corporation, Mason intentionally impoverished our grandfather on paper. He utilized that synthetic insolvency to illegally qualify Harrison for state-funded Medicaid. He defrauded the Tennessee government and the federal taxpayers to cover a $9,000 monthly nursing contract while he drank craft beer on a patio funded by stolen equity. The local municipal judge seated near the piano stood up, placed his crystal glass on a passing tray, and walked swiftly toward the lobby, refusing to share oxygen with admitted felons. Because defrauding a federal welfare program carries severe statutory penalties, the authorities do not send polite warnings. I informed the crowd, my tone flat and uncompromising. At this exact moment, a federal financial crimes task force is executing civil asset forfeiture warrants. Mason, your luxury truck is currently being towed to a municipal impound lot. And Mom, Dad, the house where you hosted your performative Sunday barbecues has been seized. The document inside that silver box is your formal 24-hour notice of eviction. Gary stared blindly at the stage, his spirit entirely broken. The curated, pristine family image shattered into 1,000 irrecoverable pieces. Their social currency was incinerated in front of the exact demographic they worshipped. I turned my focus back to my brother. Mason stood isolated under the amber spotlights. He was holding the silver box, his hands shaking so severely the thick cardstock vibrated. I stepped closer to him. You stole our grandfather's financial security to fund your illusions, I said, dropping my voice into a localized, lethal register. And you raided his bedroom to provide the correct accessories for your victory lap. I pointed directly at his left wrist. The vintage gold Rolex gleamed against his tailored cuff. It represented decades of disciplined labor and hardware sales, stolen to legitimize a counterfeit existence. Unclasp the timepiece, Mason, I instructed. He blinked, staring at me through a haze of shock. He opened his mouth to formulate an excuse, but no sound emerged. Take off the watch right now, or my next conversation will be with the Nashville Police Department regarding the possession of stolen property in front of 200 witnesses, I promised. The threat of immediate law enforcement severed his final thread of resistance. Mason let out a pathetic, humiliated whimper. His trembling fingers fumbled with the heavy gold clasp. He struggled to release the mechanism, his lack of coordination betraying his deep foundational panic. The clasp finally yielded. He slid the heavy gold band off his wrist and held it out toward me. I reached out and plucked the heirloom from his palm. The metal felt warm. I slipped the priceless artifact safely into the pocket of my wool suit. I stood tall on the platform, surveying the silent, horrified room. The audit was public record, but the statutory cleanup was just arriving at the front doors. I stood on the elevated wooden platform holding the cold brass casing of my grandfather's vintage Rolex. The artifact rested securely inside the pocket of my tailored blazer. The ballroom was devoid of any ambient chatter. 200 affluent guests held their collective breath. They were paralyzed by the sudden structural collapse of the reigning suburban dynasty. The amber spotlights casting shadows across the stage illuminated the stark terror painting my family's faces. Mason stared at his empty wrist. His chest heaved with shallow, ragged gasps. He looked like a man who had stepped off a secure ledge into a bottomless chasm. Gary gripped the edges of the podium. The knuckles on his hands strained against his skin, turning a sickly shade of white. My father tried to formulate a cohesive sentence, but his vocal cords yielded nothing but a dry, hollow rasp. Brenda sat in the front row, paralyzed. Her emerald green evening gown rustled as a violent tremor shook her entire frame. They were waiting for a reprieve. They expected the reliable daughter to offer a solution to the catastrophe she had just unveiled. I offered them nothing. I maintained my rigid professional posture. I watched them suffocate under the weight of their own empirical data. The suffocating silence was abruptly shattered. The heavy mahogany double doors at the rear of the banquet hall swung inward. The movement was forceful and synchronized. A sharp draft of cool autumn air rushed into the sweltering room. Federal financial task forces do not announce their arrival with flashing sirens or dramatic declarations. They operate with the quiet, devastating efficiency of an incoming tide. A coordinated team of specialized investigators strode into the country club. They wore crisp, dark suits and maintained a posture of perpetual skepticism. They moved with the clinical precision of apex predators, executing a finalized corporate acquisition. Agent Holden led the formation. The federal operative I had briefed in a windowless conference room days earlier carried a thick leather portfolio. Beside him walked Supervisor Miller from the State Adult Protective Services Division. 4 additional armed officers trailed them, forming an impenetrable tactical wedge. The affluent attendees recoiled. The wealthy politicians and real estate developers pulled their chairs closer to the white linen tablecloths. They scrambled to clear the aisles, eager to avoid any accidental physical association with the approaching authorities. The dark suits of the agents cut a severe line through the sea of pastel evening gowns and expensive tuxedos. Agent Holden bypassed the stunned catering staff. He marched directly toward the illuminated center stage. He did not pause to admire the crystal chandeliers or the lavish floral arrangements. He viewed the opulent surroundings merely as a container for his primary targets. Holden stopped at the base of the wooden stairs. He looked up at my brother. The federal agent did not project anger. He projected pure, statutory authority. "Mason Foster," he announced. His voice echoed cleanly across the silent room, carrying the undeniable cadence of a judicial decree. "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud. You are also charged with elder exploitation and interstate money laundering." The remaining color drained from my brother's face. He took a stuttering half-step backward. His polished leather shoes slipped slightly against the polished floorboards. 2 officers ascended the stairs, flanking him instantly. They grabbed his arms, applying practiced professional force. They pulled his hands behind his back. The sharp, metallic, ratcheting sound of steel handcuffs engaging around his wrists pierced the quiet ballroom. The mechanical click was definitive. It was the sound of a fabricated executive timeline, permanently terminating. Mason lowered his head, offering zero resistance. The arrogant cryptocurrency broker was reduced to a compliant, trembling suspect. Gary abandoned his grip on the podium. The patriarch attempted to salvage the remaining fragments of his stage set. He straightened his silk tie, deploying his hearty, buoyant persona in a desperate bid for survival. "There is a logical explanation for these discrepancies, officer," my father stammered. His pitch was entirely wrong, lacking its usual resonant confidence. "We are dealing with a private, administrative error regarding a family trust. We can resolve this quietly without disrupting the reception." Agent Holden ignored the hollow negotiation. He turned his attention to my father. "Gary Foster," he stated, retrieving a separate warrant from his portfolio. "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud and acting as an accessory to elder exploitation." Before my father could formulate another excuse, an officer secured his wrists. The second set of handcuffs clicked shut. The man who had sold out a vulnerable patriarch to erase a municipal tax lien was stripped of his freedom in front of his elite peers. Brenda pushed herself out of her chair. She stumbled toward the stage, her legs shaking so severely she struggled to maintain her balance. She deployed her ultimate defensive maneuver. She began weeping loudly, expecting her synthetic tears to shield her from the legal avalanche. "This is a mistake," she cried, her voice breaking into a pathetic whine. "We are good people. We host charity events. We are pillars of this community." Supervisor Miller stepped forward, intercepting my mother before she could reach the platform. The state investigator possessed the tired, calculating eyes of a woman who had seen enablers trade their morals for real estate far too many times. She looked at Brenda with an expression of bureaucratic indifference. "Brenda Foster, you are under arrest for your participation in a coordinated financial syndicate," Miller informed her. My mother let out a jagged, humiliated sob. She pointed a trembling finger toward the lavish buffet stations and the string quartet. "You are ruining our Heritage Gala," she wailed. "We paid a fortune for this venue. You cannot arrest us during our own celebration." Agent Holden consulted a printed ledger inside his leather binder. Regarding the funding for this specific reception, he noted his tone flat and unyielding. "We have received verification that the deposit and the catering invoices for this country club were paid using a routing number tied directly to the illicit Crestview Holdings account." Brenda stopped breathing. Her eyes widened as the mathematical reality crushed her final illusion. "Those funds are classified as the proceeds of a federal crime," Holden explained. "Therefore, the capital utilized to host this gathering is subject to immediate government seizure. The club management has been notified that your initial payment is void. You are personally liable for the outstanding balance of this entire extravagant event." Brenda collapsed. Her knees buckled, surrendering to the overwhelming weight of the financial disaster. She fell backward into a plush, velvet accent chair. She buried her face in her hands, sobbing with a loud, breathless intensity. She realized the federal seizure extended beyond the luxury pickup truck and her suburban colonial. The gala she had weaponized to project her maternal dominance was now a massive, unfunded debt resting entirely on her shoulders. She was bankrupt both socially and financially in a matter of seconds. The affluent attendees who had spent the evening swooning over her hypocritical toast now scrambled to document her destruction. Suburban elites despise scandal, but they eagerly consume it. Dozens of smartphones were elevated above the banquet tables. The bright glow of digital screens illuminated the dark room. The wives of the corporate executives captured high-definition video of my father being marched down the center aisle in restraints. The local politicians recorded my brother keeping his head bowed in disgrace. The country club board members photographed my mother weeping uncontrollably in the velvet chair. The footage would circulate through the elite neighborhood networks before the catering staff even cleared the appetizer plates. The carefully curated family image was permanently incinerated. I stood near the podium observing the procession. I watched my relatives being escorted out the heavy mahogany double doors. I did not shed a tear. I did not feel a rush of vindictive joy. The emotional toll of the betrayal had been processed and discarded during the silent investigative grind. I felt the cold, profound relief of a professional who has successfully mitigated a catastrophic liability. The parasites had been surgically excised from the host. I stepped down from the wooden stage. My low heels clicked softly against the floor. I slipped my hand into my blazer pocket, ensuring the vintage brass timepiece remained safely secured. I navigated the center aisle, walking past the stunned guests and the abandoned champagne flutes. I walked out of the venue, leaving the architects of my proposed ruin to suffocate in the trap they built. 6 months have passed since the federal task force entered that opulent country club ballroom. I am currently sitting in my sunlit Nashville office. The morning light streams through the tall glass windows, casting crisp, geometric shadows across my polished workstation. The environment is orderly, smelling faintly of roasted espresso beans and fresh printer toner. It is the sterile, comforting scent of a balanced ledger. Resting securely on the corner of my desk is Harrison's vintage gold Rolex. The brass casing catches the sunlight, gleaming with restored dignity. The leather band is worn from decades of honest labor. It no longer adorns the wrist of a fraudster. It serves as a quiet, tangible reminder that time eventually runs out for those who steal it. The aftermath of the Family Heritage Gala did not unfold with theatrical shouting matches or chaotic familial debates. It proceeded with the cold, unyielding velocity of a mathematical equation correcting itself. The narrative summarizes the clinical fallout. The federal agents who confiscated my brother's custom pickup truck and froze his illicit shell accounts did not require my testimony to secure their indictments. The pristine black legal binder I provided spoke on my behalf. The routing numbers, the forged power of attorney, and the Medicaid registry logs formed an inescapable statutory cage. Mason is serving a federal prison sentence. He traded his tailored linen shirts and his fabricated cryptocurrency brokerage for a standard-issue uniform inside a secure federal penitentiary. His arrogant, thriving entrepreneur persona disintegrated the moment the judge struck the gavel. He attempted to negotiate a plea agreement, offering to return the stolen capital, but the capital was already gone. He had squandered it on luxury vehicles and an illusion of prestige. The court mandated a severe minimum term for wire fraud and elder exploitation. His shadow empire collapsed, leaving him confined to a concrete cell where charm holds zero currency. The systemic ruin extended precisely to the architects who enabled him. Brenda and Gary assumed they could sacrifice a vulnerable patriarch to erase their municipal tax lien and preserve their curated suburban facade. They were wrong. The federal asset forfeiture seized their pristine 4-bedroom home, stripping away the primary stage set they used to project their superiority. Following the seizure, Brenda and Gary's assets were liquidated to pay state restitution. The authorities drained their remaining retirement portfolios and auctioned their vehicles to reimburse the Tennessee welfare programs they had defrauded. The financial hemorrhage devoured their entire foundation. The crushing weight of their legal defense fees and the government penalties left them destitute, forcing them to declare bankruptcy. They were cast out of their affluent neighborhood, stripped of their country club memberships, and shunned by the wealthy peers who had eagerly recorded their arrests on smartphones. They were forced to move into a cramped rental unit. They now reside in a modest apartment near a noisy interstate, miles away from the manicured lawns and the performative Sunday barbecues. Their curated image is incinerated, replaced by the stark, unforgiving reality of their own predatory greed. My grandfather was insulated from the wreckage. Harrison was safely relocated to a premium memory care facility. The probate court appointed a neutral state fiduciary to manage his health logistics, ensuring he receives round-the-clock supervision from licensed medical professionals. The environment is serene, featuring secure gardens and specialized cognitive therapies. His care is fully funded by his recovered assets. The court systematically clawed back the remaining stolen equity, redirecting the funds to their rightful purpose. Harrison sits in a comfortable wicker chair, wrapped in a warm blanket, entirely protected from the parasites who viewed his declining memory as a lucrative opportunity. Throughout this sprawling, multi-agency investigation, my career remained insulated behind the firewall of my own meticulous documentation. Avery's professional license remains untouched. The commercial bank where I serve as a senior anti-money laundering investigator reviewed my proactive disclosures to the federal task force. They recognized that I adhered strictly to all regulatory compliance statutes. I did not conceal the felonies committed by my blood relatives. I reported them. My pristine credit score is secure, and my reputation within the financial district is fortified. I sit at my desk today evaluating fresh corporate ledgers, unburdened by the toxic liabilities of my past. The sudden vibration of my cellular phone interrupts the quiet hum of the office ventilation system. The device trembles against the glass surface of my desk. The screen illuminates, casting a pale glow. A notification badge appears, signaling an incoming communication. My phone vibrates with a frantic, pleading voicemail from Brenda. The caller identification displays the unfamiliar number associated with her new, cramped apartment. Even after 6 months of permanent silence, the primary enabler continues searching for a fractured seam in my perimeter. The automated transcription software on my device converts the audio message into legible text. I read the first few sentences scrolling across the digital display. She is begging for financial mercy. She claims the rent is too high, the legal debts are suffocating them, and my father is struggling to find employment with a federal felony record trailing his name. She weaponizes her synthetic maternal grief, asking how a daughter could abandon her own parents in their darkest hour. She expects the reliable cash machine to resume its designated function. She wants me to internalize her manufactured sorrow and offer a lifeline. I reach out and pick up the smartphone. The metallic casing feels cool against my palm. Avery does not listen to the audio. Hearing the ragged, breathless pitch of her voice is unnecessary. Engaging with a manipulator only proves to them that their manipulation remains effective. It provides them with an audience, and I refuse to grant them another ticket to the theater. I swipe my thumb across the notification bar. She deletes the message. The text vanishes from the screen, leaving no trace of her desperate requests. I navigate to the internal settings menu of the communication application. I select the option to block the number. A small confirmation prompt appears on the display. I tap the screen, executing the command. The digital bridge is destroyed, severing the final thread connecting my quiet existence to their chaotic ruin. I place the phone face down on the desk and return to my spreadsheets. I look at the vintage Rolex resting nearby, its gold hands sweeping in a continuous, unbroken circle. I reflect on the core truth. Society often peddles a highly damaging narrative regarding familial obligation, conditioning us to believe that blood relations demand perpetual forgiveness regardless of the severity of the transgression. We are taught that loyalty is an inherent duty. But true compassion must begin with self-preservation. Loyalty without honesty is merely an invitation for exploitation. A family united by fraud is nothing more than a syndicate sharing a surname, bound together by mutual liabilities rather than genuine love. I did not need to engage in public screaming matches to secure my survival. I did not need to shatter wine glasses or stage dramatic emotional confrontations. The quiet professional won by relying on documentation. I established unyielding boundaries. I stepped out of the way, letting the loud ones dig their own graves. I handed them the shovels, and they performed the labor themselves. That is my story. A forged signature, a counterfeit notary, and the moment a pristine suburban illusion finally collapsed under the weight of its own lies. If you are currently standing on a fragile stage set subsidizing the illusions of people who refuse to respect your foundation, step off the platform. Stop funding the theater. Hand the damage back to the people who created it. Drop a comment below, hit the subscribe button, and I will see you in the next installment of Vega Vengeance. In modern American culture, there is immense pressure on traditional families to project an image of success, harmony, and visible prestige. The desire to appear perfect can easily warp into an exhausting competition if fundamental character is sacrificed for mere appearances. Behind the manicured lawns and the meticulously curated holiday photos of American suburbia, a quiet tragedy often plays out, far away from the eyes of neighbors. It is a tragedy not born of a sudden, unpredictable disaster, but rather of systemic, long-term failures in parenting and a profound lack of emotional awareness. In the story of Rosa James, a 32-year-old senior commercial bank auditor in Baltimore, Maryland, we bear witness to the devastating consequences of a family dynamic built entirely on transactional affection and deceit. This narrative is a dark mirror reflecting the catastrophic cost of rescuing your children from their own choices while weaponizing the stability of a reliable spouse. For Rosa's mother-in-law, Helen, her family was never a sanctuary grounded in honesty or fairness. It was a stage set, carefully constructed to hide profound internal decay. Her parenting values prioritized maintaining this illusion at all costs, raising her children by assigning them rigid, polarized roles that served her own narrative. When her son Bradley created a secret shadow family, fathering a 4-year-old son with his mistress Natalie, Helen did not correct his destructive behavior. Instead, the entire family actively subsidized and celebrated his parallel life. Helen and her daughter Vanessa posed for photographs with the illegitimate child, while Rosa worked grueling 60-hour weeks to support their household. This toxic dynamic highlights a severe absence of emotional awareness and fairness in traditional family structures. Helen and Vanessa viewed Rosa solely as an unbothered cash machine, a reliable workhorse designated to generate the capital required to sustain their illusions. Parents who fail to instill integrity in their children often raise adults who view the stability of others as an infinite resource to be harvested. By repeatedly shielding her children from accountability, Helen crippled their emotional development. Vanessa expected her brother to subsidize her endless string of failed boutique business ventures, while Bradley believed his unearned superiority granted him immunity from the law. The lack of long-term guidance culminated in a breathtaking violation of trust. Bradley forged Rosa's signature to extract a $215,000 home equity line of credit against her premarital Maryland townhouse. Utilizing a counterfeit notary stamp from a suspended associate of Vanessa's, he laundered the stolen equity through a shell LLC registered in his sister's name. He intended to use this capital to buy a luxury condo for his mistress. This was not a simple mistake. It was premeditated federal bank fraud, orchestrated by a family that had fundamentally confused enabling with love. A family united by fraud is nothing more than a criminal syndicate, sharing a surname, bound together by mutual liabilities, rather than genuine love. The pinnacle of their performative deception was the weaponization of a family ritual. Helen insisted on hosting an extravagant 10th anniversary vow renewal at an elite country club. Bradley planned to use this highly visible celebration to project the image of a devoted, flawless husband securing character witnesses just before blindsiding Rosa with divorce papers. They intended to leave her trapped beneath the fraudulent $215,000 debt while he escaped to his second family. Helen even paraded across the ballroom wearing Rosa's late grandmother's priceless vintage emerald brooch, claiming she was simply borrowing it for the evening's aesthetic. But true family responsibility demands that actions have consequences. Rosa, understanding that noise is the enemy of accuracy, did not scream or demand a tearful apology. Instead, she relied on cold documentation. She contacted the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division, establishing a federal honeypot to track every stolen dollar Bradley and Vanessa spent across state lines. At the climax of a vow renewal, Rosa handed Bradley an elegant, gold-embossed anniversary gift box. Inside were federal fraud reports, digital access logs, a transcribed confession from his mistress, and a 24-hour eviction notice for the luxury condo. The fallout was a masterclass in clinical justice. As specialized federal agents from the FBI and IRS entered the ballroom, Bradley and Vanessa were formally arrested for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, bank fraud, and money laundering. Helen, humiliated in front of her country club peers, was forced to hand over the stolen heirloom. She collapsed into a velvet chair, weeping hysterically as she realized the federal seizure extended to the funds used to pay for the extravagant vow renewal itself. Bradley was sentenced to a federal prison sentence. Vanessa's assets were liquidated to pay restitution, and Helen was forced to declare bankruptcy. The quiet professional won by establishing unyielding boundaries and letting the loud ones dig their own graves. The resolution of Rosa's story offers a profound lesson for anyone raising children or navigating complex family dynamics. Loyalty without honesty is merely an invitation for exploitation. When parents prioritize a curated public image over the arduous work of teaching honesty, fairness, and emotional awareness, they build their households on a sheer financial cliff. We are often conditioned to believe that blood relations demand perpetual forgiveness, regardless of the severity of the transgression. But true compassion must begin with self-preservation. You cannot teach a child to be a responsible adult if you spend their entire life buying them out of their own mistakes. If you have ever been the reliable sibling or spouse expected to quietly absorb the damage caused by everyone else, take this as your sign to establish your boundaries. Hand the damage back to the people who created it. Drop a comment below, hit the subscribe button, and join us for the next powerful story on Vega Vengeance. As you reflect on the collapse of this suburban dynasty, look closely at the architecture of your own life and the values you are passing on to the next generation. Are you building a sanctuary rooted in unvarnished truth? Or are you desperately holding up the walls of a stage set when the lights dim, the applause fades, and the audience finally goes home? What is left standing in the dark?